Welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight we are taking you to the feeding of the 5,000. If these stories help you sleep, tap subscribe so you never miss your next escape. Find a comfortable position, let the weight of your day go, and allow this story to carry you somewhere beautiful. The sun, a molten disk of gold, had begun its slow descent towards the western hills, painting the sky in hues of apricot and rose above the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. A gentle breeze, carrying the faint, earthy scent of wild thyme and sun-baked soil, stirred the long grasses on the verdant slopes, rustling like hushed whispers across the land. The rhythmic, almost hypnotic lapping of waves against the distant shore provided a constant, soothing counterpoint to the quiet hum of the afternoon. It was a sound that had been the soundtrack to countless lives along these shores, a timeless melody of water meeting land, of eternity meeting the ephemeral. On one such sloping hillside, not far from the fishing village of Bethsaida, a small group of weary travelers had sought a moment of respite. Their journey across the shimmering expanse of the lake had been a silent one, the small fishing boat cutting a quiet path through the sapphire waters, leaving a fleeting wake that dissolved as quickly as it formed. They had come seeking solitude, a brief sanctuary from the ceaseless demands of the world, a quiet space to simply be. Among them was Jesus of Nazareth, his presence a still point in the gentle eddy of the afternoon. His eyes, deep and compassionate, held a profound serenity, yet a subtle shadow lingered within their depths, a reflection of recent sorrow. The news of John the Baptist's death, a brutal, senseless act, had reached him like a chilling gust across the warmth of the day, a stark reminder of the world's enduring cruelty. He had felt the sharp pang of loss, a grief that resonated not only for a cousin and a prophet, but for the stark injustice that had silenced a voice crying out in the wilderness. He moved with a quiet deliberation, each step measured, each gesture imbued with a gentle authority that needed no outward display. His purpose, though often misunderstood by those around him, remained unwavering, a steady flame in the shifting winds of human expectation. He had hoped for a moment of quiet reflection, a space to mourn and to gather his thoughts, to simply sit with the weight of the world and the profound mysteries of the divine. Close by, Andrew, his face etched with the lines of a fisherman who had spent countless nights under the vast, indifferent sky, watched the teacher with a thoughtful, almost anxious gaze. Andrew was a man of practical concerns, his mind often wrestling with the tangible realities of their daily existence. He had seen the weariness in Jesus' eyes, the subtle slump of his shoulders, and understood the deep need for retreat. He was often the first to voice the concerns that gnawed at the edges of their collective peace, a pragmatic soul always seeking solutions, always trying to make sense of the immediate challenges. His hands, calloused from years of mending nets and hauling in catches, rested on his knees, his posture one of quiet readiness, as if prepared to spring into action at a moment's notice. He had felt the collective sigh of relief when their small boat had finally nudged against the shore, the brief illusion of escape from the clamoring crowds. Philip, another of the disciples, sat a little apart, his brow furrowed in a familiar expression of calculation. He possessed a keen mind for numbers, a talent that often served them well in their travels, managing their meager resources. But this same analytical bent sometimes made it difficult for him to see beyond the immediate, the quantifiable. He had been counting the remaining loaves of bread and the small pouch of coins, a habit born of necessity, and the numbers rarely seemed to add up to anything resembling comfort. He had heard the whispers among the other disciples, the growing unease about their dwindling provisions, and the sheer impossibility of sustaining their growing company, let alone the throngs that seemed to materialize wherever Jesus went. He understood the need for quiet, but his mind, ever practical, was already wrestling with the logistical challenges that inevitably followed them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, ethereal shadows across the undulating landscape, a lone figure stood on a rise overlooking the scene, his sturdy frame silhouetted against the deepening gold. He was a fisherman from Capernaum, his skin tanned and weathered by the relentless sun and the spray of the lake, his hands strong and capable. He knew these waters, these shores, every hidden cove and every treacherous current. He had seen Jesus before, perhaps from his fishing boat as the teacher walked along the shore, or heard his words echoing across the water from a crowded synagogue. His initial curiosity had drawn him to follow, a quiet observer among the growing throng. He had watched the small boat carrying Jesus and his disciples make its way across the lake, a silent sentinel tracking their progress. He understood the rhythm of here, the constant ebb and flow of people, the endless pursuit of sustenance. He had seen the crowds gathering, drawn by an invisible current, and a quiet sense of foreboding had begun to settle in his gut. He knew, with the certainty of a man who lived close to the land, that there was little here to feed so many. The air, once warm and vibrant with the midday sun, began to cool, carrying with it a subtle shift in atmosphere. The gentle lapping of waves seemed to grow a little louder, a steady, insistent whisper against the quietude. It was a sound that spoke of timelessness, of forces far greater than any human endeavor, yet it also held a comforting familiarity, a constant presence in a world of change. The scent of wild herbs, crushed underfoot by the growing multitude, mingled with the faint, tantalizing aroma of a few meager provisions, a scent that only served to highlight the vast disparity between what was available and what was needed. Despite their desire for solitude, the teacher and his disciples had not gone unnoticed. Word of their journey had spread with astonishing speed, carried by the invisible currents of rumor and hope. From every village and hamlet surrounding the lake, people had begun to gather, drawn by an irresistible force, a deep yearning for healing, for teaching, for something indefinable that resonated within their weary souls. They had walked for miles, some limping, some carrying their sick, their faces etched with a mixture of desperation and fervent belief. They streamed over the hillsides, a river of humanity flowing towards the quiet cove, their numbers swelling with each passing hour. Jesus, observing the ever-growing multitude from his vantage point on the hillside, felt a profound wave of compassion wash over him. His desire for private grief, for a moment of quiet reflection, dissolved in the face of such overwhelming need. He saw them as sheep without a shepherd, lost and vulnerable, their eyes reflecting a hunger that went far beyond the physical. His heart, already heavy with sorrow, now swelled with an even deeper empathy. He knew that their journey had been arduous, their hope fragile, and he could not turn them away. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and began to teach them, his voice carrying across the hillside, gentle yet clear, like the chime of a distant bell. He spoke of the kingdom of heaven, of love and forgiveness, of a peace that transcended earthly understanding. His words wove through the afternoon air, a balm to their troubled spirits, a source of comfort to their weary hearts. The crowd, mesmerized, listened intently, their murmurs hushed, their eyes fixed on his face. The golden light of the late afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, cast long, soft shadows across the green hillside, illuminating the eager faces of the multitude, each one a testament to hope and enduring faith. As the hours drifted by, marked only by the shifting light and the deepening shadows, Andrew's pragmatic mind began to stir with a growing unease. He glanced at the sun, now kissing the horizon, and then at the vast sea of faces before them. A knot tightened in his stomach. He knew, with a certainty born of experience, that these people would soon be hungry, and they were far from any village where food could be bought. The thought of thousands of hungry mouths, their hopes and expectations resting solely on them, was a daunting prospect. He exchanged a worried glance with Philip, whose brow was now more furrowed than ever, his lips moving silently as if calculating an impossible sum. The fisherman from Capernaum, still observing from his quiet perch, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of wonder and apprehension. He had seen crowds before, but never one so vast, so utterly captivated. He knew the practicalities of feeding a family, let alone a multitude. His eye scanned the hillside, searching for any sign of provisions, but found none. The sheer scale of the problem was immense, a logistical nightmare that even the wealthiest merchant would struggle to solve. He saw the disciples beginning to confer, their gestures growing more agitated, their faces reflecting the growing concern that he himself felt. The sun dipped further, painting the sky in ever deeper shades of violet and indigo, and a cool evening breeze began to stir, carrying with it the undeniable chill of an approaching night. The gentle lapping of waves, once a soothing rhythm, now seemed to underscore the vastness of the challenge, a quiet, insistent reminder of the endless needs of humanity. The sun dipped further, painting the sky in ever deeper shades of violet and indigo, and a cool evening breeze began to stir, carrying with it the undeniable chill of an approaching night. The gentle lapping of waves, once a soothing rhythm, now seemed to underscore the vastness of the challenge, a quiet, insistent reminder of the endless needs of humanity. From the crest of the hill, where the teacher stood, his gaze swept across the sprawling landscape, taking in the incredible sight that had unfolded before him. What had begun as a quiet retreat, a hopeful search for solitude and reflection after the sorrowful news of John's death, had transformed into an immense, living tapestry of humanity. He had sought a desolate place, a quiet cove where the wind whispered only secrets to the ancient rocks, but the people, in their earnest longing, had followed him. They had walked for miles, some for an entire day, around the northern curve of the Sea of Galilee, their determination a testament to the profound hunger that gnawed at their souls, a hunger far deeper than any physical craving. He watched them now, a multitude that stretched across the verdant slopes, spilling down towards the shimmering water's edge. They were not merely a crowd, they were individual stories, each face etched with its own unique narrative of hope, pain, and expectation. There were the sick, their bodies racked with ailments, their eyes pleading for relief. There were the lame, leaning on rough-hewn staffs or carried gently by loved ones, their faces pale with exhaustion but alight with a fragile hope. Mothers clutched their children, their faces a mixture of weariness and fierce protectiveness, their gaze fixed on the man who had brought so much light into their shadowed world. Old men, Their backs bent by years of toil, leaned heavily on younger shoulders, their ancient eyes holding a flicker of renewed faith. A mother in the crowd, her name was Leah, shifted her small son, Nathan, higher on her hip, his head heavy with sleep against her shoulder. The journey had been arduous, a long, dusty trek from Magdala, but the stories of the teacher's compassion had pulled her forward, a magnetic force she could not resist. Her own body ached, her feet were sore, and her stomach rumbled with a hollow ache, but a deeper hunger propelled her, a yearning for healing for her sister, who lay feverish at home, and a quiet hope for a better future for her child. She had seen the teacher heal others, heard his words of comfort, and in his presence, a sense of peace settled over her, a rare and precious balm. She watched him now, a figure of calm amidst the swirling mass of people, his gentle presence a stark contrast to the vastness of their need. A quiet anxiety, like a small, cold stone, settled in her stomach as she considered the coming night and the emptiness of their food pouch, but she pushed it down, focusing instead on the warmth of Nathan's small hand in hers and the unwavering hope in her heart. Nearby, an elderly man named Ezra, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, leaned heavily on his gnarled olive-wood staff. He had seen much in his 80 years, enough to make him wary of promises and quick to doubt. He had heard the whispers about this Jesus of Nazareth, tales of miracles and profound teachings, but Ezra had always been a man of the earth, trusting only what he could see and touch. He had followed the crowd out of a deep-seated curiosity, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name, a yearning for a truth that felt more substantial than the endless pronouncement of the Roman governors or the rigid interpretations of the temple priests. He had witnessed the teacher's healing touch, seen a blind man's eyes open to the light, and a lame man rise and walk, and a quiet, almost imperceptible shift had begun within him. Yet, as he looked around at the thousands of people, his gaze sweeping over the vast, empty hillside, a familiar skepticism gnawed at him. Where would they find food for so many? The disciples, bustling with worried expressions, seemed to share his concern, their hurried whispers carrying faintly on the breeze. Jesus, seeing the vast multitude, felt a profound wave of compassion wash over him, a deep empathy that resonated with every fiber of his being. They were like sheep without a shepherd, lost and vulnerable, their spiritual and physical needs laid bare before him. He knew their weariness, their hunger, their unspoken pleas for solace and understanding. He knew the weight of their daily struggles, the burdens they carried, the quiet desperation that often shadowed their days. His heart went out to them, a boundless wellspring of love and care. He descended a few steps from the crest, his movements deliberate and unhurried, his presence radiating a calm authority that seemed to quiet the restless murmuring of the crowd. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried across the hillside, clear and resonant, a soothing melody that drew every ear. He began to teach them, speaking of the kingdom of God, of love and forgiveness, of the true meaning of righteousness and the path to eternal life. His words were not abstract pronouncements but vivid parables, stories drawn from their everyday lives, of sowers and seeds, of lost sheep and prodigal sons, of light shining in the darkness. He spoke of a God who saw them, who loved them unconditionally, who yearned for their well-being. As he taught, a palpable sense of peace began to settle over the multitude. The anxious shuffling quieted, the hurried whispers ceased, and thousands of eyes remained fixed on his face, absorbing every word. The air itself seemed to grow still, filled with the scent of wild thyme and sun-baked earth, mingling with the subtle aroma of freshly broken bread carried on the breeze from some distant, unseen camp. The warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the green hillside, illuminating the faces of the multitude, revealing expressions of rapt attention, of dawning understanding, of profound hope. Then he began to heal. One by one, or sometimes in small groups, people were brought forward, a man with a withered hand, a woman suffering from a chronic illness, a child racked with fever. With a gentle touch, a quiet word, or sometimes simply a gaze of profound compassion, he brought relief, restoration, and renewal. The cries of pain turned to gasps of wonder, the tears of sorrow to tears of joy. The lame walked, the blind saw, the deaf heard, and the sick were made whole. Each healing was not merely a physical restoration but a profound affirmation of God's love, a tangible sign of the kingdom breaking through into their broken world. Andrew, his kind face etched with concern, watched the teacher with a mixture of awe and growing apprehension. He had seen Jesus heal countless times, witness miracles that defied all logic, yet the sheer scale of the situation now before them felt overwhelming. The sun was beginning its slow descent towards the western horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, and the shadows were lengthening, stretching like inquisitive fingers across the hillside. The crowd, far from diminishing, seemed only to grow, as more people, having heard the news, continued to trickle in from distant villages. Andrew, ever the pragmatist, knew that these people had been following Jesus for hours, some for days, their provisions long since depleted. He glanced at the other disciples, their faces reflecting similar anxieties, their hushed conversations growing more frequent and urgent. Philip, his brow furrowed in concentration, had been mentally calculating for what felt like an eternity. He was good with numbers, a skill that served him well in the practicalities of their small, itinerant group. He had tried to estimate the number of people, his eye sweeping across the vast expanse of faces, multiplying by the meager cost of a single meal. The figures that spun in his mind were astronomical, utterly beyond their means. 200 denarii, he thought, a full 8 months' wages for a laborer, would not even buy enough bread for each person to have a small bite. The sheer inadequacy of their resources was a cold, hard fact, a wall of impossibility that loomed before them. He felt the weight of the problem pressing down on him, a heavy burden of responsibility for which he had no solution. He watched the teacher, still speaking with such gentle authority, still healing with such boundless compassion, and a knot of despair tightened in his stomach. How could they possibly feed so many? A fisherman from Capernaum, a sturdy man named Joram, stood on the periphery of the crowd, his sun-baked face impassive, his strong hands clasped in front of him. He knew these hills, knew the sparse resources of the surrounding villages. He had seen Jesus many times by the lake, had even heard him teach from his own fishing boat. He had followed out of a mixture of curiosity and a deep respect for the teacher's quiet power. Joram had watched the crowd swell throughout the day, observed the disciples' growing consternation, and understood the impossible dilemma they faced. There was no market nearby, no village large enough to supply food for even a fraction of these people. He knew the practicalities of leave, the harsh realities of hunger and scarcity. He had seen famines, witnessed the desperate scramble for food. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement of the insurmountable problem. Yet, he remained, drawn by an invisible thread, a sense that something extraordinary was unfolding, even if he couldn't yet grasp its nature. As the afternoon wore on, the sun dipping lower still, casting long, golden fingers across the landscape, Jesus turned to Philip, his eyes filled with a gentle knowing. "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" he asked, his voice calm amidst the rising murmur of the crowd. It was a question that seemed to hang in the air, a challenge that went beyond the immediate logistical problem. Philip, startled by the direct question, stammered a little, his calculations tumbling through his mind. 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to have a little, he replied, his voice tinged with a weariness born of practical impossibility. He gestured helplessly at the vast expanse of faces, his gaze sweeping from the closest rows to the distant figures on the horizon. The numbers simply did not add up. It was an exercise in futility, a problem without a solution, at least not one that human hands or human wealth could provide. His logical mind, so accustomed to order and clear accounting, reeled at the sheer magnitude of the need. Andrew, ever the one to seek a tangible solution, however small, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd with a desperate hope. He had been quietly asking around, seeking any scrap of food, any offering, however meager. He had found a young boy, perhaps no older than Nathan, who, with a shy but generous spirit, had offered his own small meal. "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish," Andrew announced, his voice carrying a note of both discovery and utter despair. He held up his hands, indicating the small size of the offering. "But what are these among so many?" The question hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the vast chasm between what they had and what was needed. 5 small loaves, 2 small fish, it was barely enough for a single person, let alone 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. The inadequacy of it was almost comical, a cruel joke in the face of such overwhelming hunger. Leah, the mother, heard Andrew's words, and a fresh wave of anxiety washed over her. 5 loaves and 2 fish. Her own small pouch, now empty, had contained more than that this morning. She looked at her sleeping son, his small belly undoubtedly rumbling, and a pang of worry shot through her. They had come so far, hoped so much, but now, as the shadows deepened and the air grew cool, the reality of their situation pressed in. She wrapped her shawl tighter around Nathan, pulling him closer, her gaze drifting towards the teacher, a silent plea in her eyes. Ezra, the old man, heard the exchange between the disciples. 5 loaves and 2 fish. He let out a soft, cynical chuckle, a dry, raspy sound that was quickly swallowed by the general murmur of the crowd. He had known it. He had known it was impossible. The young men, with their fervent faith, were good-hearted, but they were naive. Miracles of healing, yes, he had seen those, but feeding thousands from nothing, that was a different matter entirely. He had lived through lean times, known the gnawing ache of an empty stomach, and understood the harsh realities of the world. His skepticism, momentarily softened by the teacher's words and healings, returned with a vengeance, a familiar, comforting cloak. He prepared himself for the inevitable disappointment, the slow, disheartened dispersal of the crowd as night fully descended. But Jesus, his gaze still calm, still filled with that boundless compassion, simply looked at Andrew, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He did not dismiss the small offering, nor did he express any dismay at its apparent inadequacy. Instead, he simply said, "Have the people sit down." His voice was quiet, yet it carried an undeniable authority, a serene confidence that cut through the disciples' anxieties and the crowd's growing restlessness. The disciples, though still perplexed, began to move amongst the multitude, their voices calling out instructions. "Sit down, everyone, sit down," they urged, their initial agitation giving way to a bewildered obedience. The people, accustomed to following the teacher's every instruction, began to settle onto the green grass, forming orderly groups. The hillside, which had been a chaotic, sprawling mass, slowly transformed into a vast, leaving mosaic of seated figures. The rich green of the grass, dotted with the vibrant hues of their cloaks and tunics, stretched as far as the eye could see. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet wonder, as thousands of eyes turned once more to the teacher, waiting to see what would happen next. The gentle lapping of the waves against the distant shore continued its soothing rhythm, a constant, comforting presence beneath the vast, open sky. The air, now cooler, carried the sweet scent of wild herbs, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the entire scene in a warm, ethereal glow, transforming the ordinary hillside into a sacred space, poised on the brink of an extraordinary revelation. As thousands of eyes turned once more to the teacher, waiting to see what would happen next, the gentle lapping of the waves against the distant shore continued its soothing rhythm, a constant, comforting presence beneath the vast, open sky. The air, now cooler, carried the sweet scent of wild herbs, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the entire scene in a warm, ethereal glow, transforming the ordinary hillside into a sacred space, poised on the brink of an extraordinary revelation. Yet, as the sun began its slow descent towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and soft rose, a different kind of light began to dim in the hearts of the disciples. A practical, gnawing concern, like a persistent pebble in a sandal, started to chafe at their composure. The initial exhilaration of the day, the profound teachings, and the miraculous healings slowly gave way to an undeniable, pressing reality. The sheer number of people, a living, breathing tapestry of humanity stretching across the verdant slope, now represented not just a congregation, but a monumental logistical problem. Andrew, his kind face etched with a familiar worry, shifted his weight, his gaze sweeping over the multitude. He had spent his life on the Sea of Galilee, accustomed to the predictable rhythms of fishing, where a day's catch either fed his family or it did not, a simple, tangible equation. This, however, was an entirely different calculus. Thousands upon thousands, their faces now beginning to show the subtle signs of fatigue and hunger, their initial excitement mellowing into a quiet, expectant patience. He saw mothers hushing restless children, men exchanging glances of growing apprehension, and the elderly leaning more heavily on their staffs, their energy waning with the fading light. A deep furrow appeared between Andrew's brows, a silent testament to the burden he felt settling upon his shoulders. He was a man who preferred action, a man who sought solutions, and in this moment, he felt utterly, completely at a loss. Philip, ever the pragmatist, stood a little apart, his mind already racing through calculations he knew, even before completing them, would lead to an impossible sum. His eyes, usually sharp and discerning, darted from the vast crowd to the meager provisions they might possess, then to the distant, hazy outline of Bethsaida. He was a man who understood resources, who could account for every coin and every measure of grain, and the numbers he was conjuring in his head were stark, undeniable, and frankly, terrifying. The sun, now lower, cast long, distorted shadows of the people across the hillside, making the crowd seem even larger, an endless, undulating sea of human need. Philip ran a hand over his neatly trimmed beard, a gesture of quiet desperation, as the enormity of the situation pressed down upon him, threatening to suffocate any lingering sense of hope. He considered the sheer volume of mouths, the distance to any market, the paltry coins in their shared purse, and a cold dread began to seep into his bones. A mother in the crowd, her face lined with the daily struggles of leave, felt a similar anxiety stirring within her. She had come from a village many miles away, drawn by the stories of the teacher, her heart heavy with a child's persistent cough and a husband's ailing back. She had spent the day listening, her spirit uplifted by the words of hope, her eyes wide with wonder at the healings she had witnessed. But now, as the golden light softened and the air grew cooler, her stomach rumbled with a hollow ache, and she could feel the small, insistent tug of her youngest child's hand, a silent plea for sustenance. She had brought a small piece of dried fish and a few dates, carefully rationed, but they had been consumed hours ago. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, seeing the same quiet concern reflected there, a collective realization that the day's spiritual nourishment, while profound, had not sated the body's fundamental needs. A sigh, barely audible, escaped her lips, a mixture of weariness and a growing, familiar worry about where the next meal would come from. Nearby, an elderly man, his gnarled hand resting on his sturdy staff, watched the disciples with a keen, observant eye. He had lived long enough to see promises broken and hopes dashed, and while Jesus' words had stirred something deep within him, a flicker of an old, forgotten faith, he remained a man of the earth, grounded in the harsh realities of survival. He had followed out of curiosity, a lifetime of skepticism having taught him to trust only what he could see, touch, and taste. He had heard the murmurs among the crowd, the low grumbles of empty stomachs, and he knew that even the most inspiring words could not fill a belly. He had seen the disciples, these earnest, well-meaning men, and he knew they were as human as he was, subject to the same limitations. He watched them gather, their faces clouded with concern, and a cynical thought, born of long experience, began to form in his mind. This is where the grand pronouncements meet the hard ground of reality. It was Peter, ever impetuous, who finally broke the silence among the disciples, his voice a low rumble of exasperation. "Teacher," he began, stepping forward, his broad shoulders slightly hunched with the weight of his concern, "it is already getting late, and this is a desolate place. There are no villages nearby where these people can find food." His words, though directed at Jesus, were an unspoken plea, a desperate suggestion born of practical necessity. "Send them away," he urged, his voice softening with genuine concern for the weary multitude. Let them go into the surrounding villages and hamlets to buy themselves something to eat." James and John, standing close by, nodded in agreement, their faces mirroring Peter's apprehension. The sheer scale of the gathering, which had seemed so glorious in the midday sun, now felt overwhelming, almost threatening, as dusk began to creep in. The air, once warm and inviting, now held a slight chill, and the distant cries of a few hungry children carried clearly on the breeze, amplifying the disciples' growing unease. They were shepherds of souls, yes, but they were also practical men, responsible for the well-being of those who followed their teacher. And right now, the most pressing need was food. Jesus, who had been observing the crowd with a serene, compassionate gaze, turned slowly to face his disciples. His eyes, deep and knowing, held no trace of panic or even concern, only a profound, unwavering calm that seemed to absorb the anxiety swirling around him. He listened patiently to Peter's urgent plea, his head tilted slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. The golden light of the setting sun caught the gentle lines around his eyes, making them seem even more luminous, more ancient than his years. Then his gaze settled upon Philip, who stood a little further back, still lost in his mental calculations, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jesus' voice, when he spoke, was soft, yet it carried an undeniable clarity, cutting through the growing murmur of the crowd and the disciples' internal turmoil. It was a voice that commanded attention not through volume, but through its inherent authority, a quiet resonance that seemed to vibrate with deeper meaning. "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" he asked, his question directed specifically at Philip, yet encompassing all the disciples, indeed, all of humanity's limited understanding. It was not a question seeking information, for Jesus already knew the answer. It was a question designed to probe, to challenge, to illuminate the very chasm between human capability and divine possibility. The words hung in the air, gentle yet undeniably weighty, a gauntlet thrown down not in accusation, but in invitation. Philip, startled by the direct address, blinked, his mental ledger momentarily forgotten. He had been so engrossed in his own despairing arithmetic that he had not anticipated being singled out. He looked at Jesus, then back at the vast expanse of faces, his mind scrambling to reconcile the impossible request with the undeniable reality. His practical, logical mind, so adept at managing the meager finances of their small group, immediately began to process the problem in terms of cost and supply. He knew the price of bread, the cost of a day's labor, the value of a denarius. He knew these things intimately. "Teacher," Philip began, his voice tinged with a weariness that spoke volumes, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get even a little. The words tumbled out, a stark, unvarnished assessment of the situation, a testament to the sheer, overwhelming scale of the problem as viewed through the lens of human resources. 200 denarii, he knew, represented more than half a year's wages for a common laborer, a sum far beyond anything they possessed in their humble treasury. It was an astronomical figure for a single meal, an amount that would bankrupt them many times over. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of despair, the crushing reality of an insurmountable obstacle. He saw the problem not just as a lack of money, but as a fundamental inadequacy of the entire world's resources to meet such an immediate, immense need in such a desolate place. The numbers simply did not add up, they screamed impossibility. Andrew, listening intently, felt a fresh wave of hopelessness wash over him. Philip's words, though blunt, were undeniably true. He had been thinking along similar lines, his mind already concluding that sending the people away was the only viable, albeit regrettable, option. The sheer volume of mouths to feed, the empty baskets, the dwindling light, all conspired to create a suffocating sense of helplessness. He looked at Jesus, wondering what answer could possibly be given to such an undeniable truth, to such a stark, realistic assessment of their utter lack. The mother in the crowd, having overheard fragments of the disciples' anxious conversation, felt a familiar tightening in her chest. 200 denarii, she mused, was a fortune, more money than her family saw in a year. The thought that even such an immense sum would not be enough to feed everyone confirmed her quiet fears. A pang of disappointment, soft but persistent, began to settle in her heart. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the teacher would have a simple solution, a word that would miraculously conjure food. But the disciples' despairing tones, their practical, earthly concerns, echoed her own, grounding her back in the harsh realities of their world. She pulled her child a little closer, a silent gesture of protection against the gnawing emptiness that now seemed to pervade the air. The elderly man, his face a mask of weathered experience, watched Philip's calculation with a knowing nod. He muttered to himself, his voice a low rasp, that sounds about right. He had seen countless schemes fail, countless promises evaporate in the face of hard facts. Philip's words, though spoken with a hint of despair, resonated with the old man's own cynical wisdom. He had expected no less. This was the way of the world, he thought, a world where hunger was a constant companion and abundance a fleeting dream. He leaned more heavily on his staff, a familiar weariness settling in his bones, his initial spark of hope beginning to dim once more, replaced by the comfortable, albeit bleak, certainty of human limitation. The sun continued its inexorable journey towards the horizon, casting longer, deeper shadows across the hillside. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint, distant scent of salt from the sea, mingling with the earthy aroma of the sun-baked ground and the wild thyme. The gentle lapping of the waves, a constant, soothing rhythm throughout the day, now seemed to underscore the quiet tension that had settled over the multitude. The golden light, once so vibrant, now softened into a more muted, contemplative glow, bathing the scene in a warm, almost melancholic beauty. Jesus, however, remained utterly unperturbed. He allowed Philip's words to hang in the air, to fully register the depth of the disciples' practical despair, the full extent of their human limitation. His gaze swept over each of them, then back to the vast, expectant crowd, his eyes holding a profound compassion that seemed to encompass every hungry stomach, every worried heart. He stood there, a figure of serene authority amidst the growing anxiety, a silent anchor in a sea of human concern. The moment was ripe, the stage set, for a revelation that would transcend all earthly calculations, all practical limitations, and all human despair. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken questions and unvoiced anxieties, as the world waited, poised on the very edge of the impossible. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken questions and unvoiced anxieties, as the world waited, poised on the very edge of the impossible. A gentle breeze, carrying the scent of wild thyme and the distant, briny breath of the lake, stirred the hair of the multitude, rustling through their worn garments as they turned their expectant faces toward the teacher. Jesus, his gaze sweeping over the vast assembly, felt the weight of their collective hope, their silent plea for sustenance, and the sheer, overwhelming scale of the challenge that lay before them all. His eyes, though filled with an infinite compassion, also held a flicker of something else, a quiet determination that seemed to draw strength from the very enormity of the need. He understood the gnawing emptiness in their bellies, the weariness in their bones, and the quiet desperation that often accompanied the setting sun for those who live day to day, trusting in providence. He turned then, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the murmuring crowd with a gentle authority that commanded immediate attention. "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" he asked, his eyes settling on Philip, who stood a little apart, his brow furrowed in concentration, already calculating the impossibility of the situation. Philip, ever the pragmatist, the one who saw the world in numbers and tangible resources, felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He had been counting, not just the faces, but the coins in his own purse, the meager provisions they had brought for themselves, and the vast, empty expanse of the hillside. His mind, accustomed to the precise logic of trade and expenditure, immediately grappled with the sheer, unmanageable scale of the problem. 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get even a little, Philip replied, his voice tinged with a resigned weariness, the figures tumbling from his lips like stones dropped into a deep well. A denarius, he knew, was a day's wage, and 200 of them represented months of arduous labor, a sum far beyond their collective means, a sum that would barely offer a crumb to each person in this vast, hungry throng. He gestured vaguely at the sea of faces, his hand falling back to his side in a gesture of helplessness. The sun, now beginning its slow descent towards the western hills, cast long, golden shadows across the verdant slope, making the crowd appear even larger, their numbers stretching endlessly into the soft, fading light. Philip felt a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over him, a sense of being utterly outmatched by the demands of the moment, his practical mind unable to conjure a solution from thin air. A little further back, a mother in the crowd, her face etched with the subtle lines of worry and the fatigue of a long day's journey, clutched her small child closer. The boy, perhaps 4 years old, leaned against her leg, his small hand instinctively reaching for her worn tunic. Her own stomach rumbled softly, a dull ache that had become a constant companion, but it was the thought of her son's hunger that truly tightened her chest. She had followed Jesus for days, drawn by the stories of his healing touch, his words of comfort, and the profound sense of peace that seemed to radiate from him. Her hope had been a fragile thing, nurtured by the promise of his presence, but now, as the sun began to dip and the chill of evening threatened, a quiet anxiety began to creep in. She had seen the disciples' worried faces, heard their hushed conversations about the lack of food and the sheer impossibility of feeding so many. The vastness of the crowd, once a source of communal warmth, now felt like an overwhelming barrier between her and any hope of sustenance. She looked at her son's innocent face, then back at the distant figure of Jesus, a silent prayer forming on her lips, a desperate plea for something, anything, to ease the gnawing emptiness. Andrew, ever the earnest and practical man, had been listening to Philip's calculations with a growing sense of despair. His own mind had raced through the same impossible sums, the same disheartening conclusions. He knew the meager provisions they carried, the small coin purse that was meant to sustain them for their own journey, not to feed an entire multitude. He had walked among the people, his kind face reflecting their weariness, his heart heavy with the shared burden of their hunger. He understood the logistical nightmare, the sheer logistical impossibility of the situation, and his usual optimism began to wane under the weight of such an immense, unsolvable problem. Yet, even in his despair, Andrew possessed a restless energy, a need to do something, to find some small, tangible piece of the puzzle. While Philip remained rooted, lost in his calculations, Andrew began to move through the edges of the crowd, his eyes scanning, searching, perhaps for a hidden spring, a forgotten basket, anything that might offer a glimmer of hope. He moved with a quiet urgency, his gaze sweeping over the faces, the bundles, the small, hopeful offerings that people had brought for themselves. The air, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and distant wild herbs, now carried a subtle undertone of anticipation, a collective holding of breath. It was then, near the back of a small family cluster, that his eyes fell upon a young boy, no older than 10 or 11, sitting quietly beside his mother. The boy, with bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him, held a small, woven basket on his lap. There was something about the way he clutched it, a careful reverence, that drew Andrew closer. The boy's mother, a woman with a gentle smile and tired eyes, looked up as Andrew approached, a question in her gaze. "What do you have there, young one?" Andrew asked, his voice soft, trying not to startle the boy. He knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level, his kind face etched with a mixture of weariness and a faint, almost imperceptible spark of curiosity. The boy, a little shy but not entirely fearful, slowly opened the lid of his basket, revealing its humble contents. Inside, nestled carefully, were 5 small barley loaves, flat and round, the kind made for a simple, solitary meal, and 2 small, dried fish, no bigger than a man's hand. They were the provisions for his own journey, his own small contribution to the day, perhaps packed by his mother with careful love. Andrew's heart sank a little, even as a tiny flicker of something unidentifiable stirred within him. He looked at the meager offering, then back at the vast, hungry sea of faces stretching out before them. 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. It was a child's lunch, a pittance, barely enough for one, certainly not enough for thousands. He felt a wave of resignation wash over him, a renewed sense of the sheer futility of their situation. The boy's offering, though given with an innocent generosity, only served to highlight the immense disparity between what they had and what was needed. He rose slowly, the small basket still open in the boy's lap, and walked back towards Jesus, his steps heavy with the weight of his discovery. Philip was still there, his shoulders slumped, his calculations having led him to the same dead end. Andrew approached Jesus, a conflicted expression on his face, a mixture of a small, almost foolish hope and a profound, practical skepticism. "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish," Andrew announced, his voice carrying a note of apology, as if presenting such a meager offering was almost an insult to the enormity of the problem. He paused, then added, the words tinged with a deep, almost insurmountable doubt, "But what are these among so many?" His gaze swept across the endless faces, then back to the small, humble basket in his mind's eye. The question hung in the air, a stark declaration of human limitation, a testament to the vast chasm between their meager resources and the desperate need that surrounded them. It was a question that encapsulated the very essence of their human predicament, a challenge that seemed to defy all logic, all reason, all possibility. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting the hillside in a soft, ethereal glow, as if waiting for an answer that no human mind could possibly conceive. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting the hillside in a soft, ethereal glow, as if waiting for an answer that no human mind could possibly conceive. A hush had fallen over the multitude, a collective breath held in the fading light, their eyes fixed upon the figure standing calmly amidst the swirling anxieties of his disciples. Jesus, with a quietude that seemed to absorb the very chaos around him, turned his gaze from the vast sea of faces to his closest companions. His eyes, though filled with an ancient wisdom, held no trace of the panic that gripped Philip and Andrew, only a profound, unwavering certainty. "Tell the people to sit down," Jesus instructed, his voice carrying with a gentle authority that cut through the murmuring breeze, reaching each disciple as if he had spoken to them alone. "Have them recline on the green grass." Philip, still wrestling with the numbers swirling in his mind, blinked, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked out at the sprawling crowd, then back at Jesus, as if expecting a further instruction, a logical next step to precede such an impossible command. "Sit down?" he thought, "but there is nothing to eat. Why would they sit?" The practicalities of such an action, the sheer effort of organizing thousands of weary, hungry individuals, seemed an additional burden to an already insurmountable problem. He saw no immediate purpose, no logical progression in this directive. Andrew, ever the man of action, though often prone to worry, felt a flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps just a desperate willingness to obey, even without understanding. He looked at the vast expanse of green, dotted with patches of wild herbs and small, sun-baked stones. The grass was indeed verdant and soft, a welcome respite after a long day of standing and listening. He imagined the sheer effort it would take to move so many, to convince them to settle, but the teacher's tone brooked no argument, only quiet, confident instruction. He nodded, a silent commitment forming in his heart to carry out the task, however bewildering it seemed. The disciples, though bewildered, began to move amongst the throng, their initial hesitation giving way to the quiet discipline they had learned at Jesus' side. They were accustomed to his unconventional ways, to commands that often defied immediate understanding but always, in the end, revealed a deeper purpose. They began to speak to the people, their voices calm and steady, echoing Jesus' own tranquil demeanor. "Sit down, please," they urged, their hands making gentle, guiding motions. "The teacher asks that you sit upon the grass." A ripple of quiet curiosity spread through the crowd. The mother in the crowd, her small child nestled against her hip, felt a surge of relief at the prospect of resting her tired feet. She had been standing for hours, her body aching, her stomach a hollow ache that mirrored her son's quiet whines. She had seen the disciples' worried faces, heard their hushed, anxious tones, and a fresh wave of despair had threatened to wash over her. But now, This new instruction, though puzzling, carried a sense of order, a promise of stillness. She looked at her child, whose eyes, wide and innocent, were fixed on Jesus, as if he sensed something extraordinary was about to unfold. She lowered herself carefully onto the cool, soft blades of grass, pulling her child close, a quiet prayer forming in her heart for whatever might come next. The elderly man, leaning heavily on his gnarled staff, watched the disciples with a jaundiced eye. He had seen many promises made and broken in his long years, many leaders who spoke grand words but delivered little. He had followed Jesus out of a blend of curiosity and a deep-seated weariness with the world, hoping for a spark of something new, yet always prepared for disappointment. "Sit down?" He grumbled internally. For what purpose? To watch the sun set on our hunger? Yet, he saw the earnestness in the disciples' faces, the quiet authority in Jesus' posture, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite name stirred within him. He slowly, painfully, lowered himself to the ground, his old bones protesting, but his eyes remained sharp, watchful. He would observe, he decided, every movement, every gesture, searching for the trick, the inevitable letdown. The fisherman from Capernaum, a man whose leave was dictated by the predictable rhythms of the lake and the unpredictable bounty of its waters, observed the scene with a practiced eye. He knew the local terrain, the sparse resources, the sheer impossibility of feeding so many. He had seen the disciples' distress, their frantic calculations, and he had nodded in silent agreement with their assessment. There was simply no way. Yet, he watched as Jesus, with an almost imperceptible nod, began to direct his disciples. The fisherman, accustomed to the precise movements required to cast a net or navigate a squall, recognized the quiet command in Jesus' bearing. He saw the people, weary but compliant, begin to settle, and a new kind of curiosity, distinct from his initial skepticism, began to stir within him. He leaned back against a smooth, sun-warmed rock, his strong hands resting on his knees, ready to witness whatever strange thing might happen next. The disciples, now moving with a renewed sense of purpose, began to organize the vast crowd. In groups of hundreds, Andrew called out, his voice clear and resonant, and then in 50s. It was a monumental task, but the people, accustomed to the structured order of their lives, to the rhythms of community and family, responded with a surprising docility. They had been drawn by Jesus' words, by the hope of healing, and now, in this moment of quiet expectation, they trusted. They began to arrange themselves, families gathering together, neighbors forming small clusters. The disciples moved amongst them, guiding, directing, their movements calm and reassuring. Slowly, deliberately, the chaotic mass of humanity began to transform. The hillside, once a sprawling, formless expanse of individuals, began to take on a new geometry. Rows formed, then squares, then rectangles, like a vast, leaving mosaic unfurling across the verdant slope. It was an astonishing sight, a testament to the quiet power of a single, simple instruction. The mother, nestled with her child, watched as the people around her settled into orderly rows. She saw other mothers pulling their children close, fathers adjusting their cloaks, old men finding comfortable spots. A sense of calm, almost a reverence, began to settle over the hillside. The anxiety that had gnawed at her for hours began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging, a feeling of being cared for. The golden light of the late afternoon sun, now softer, warmer, cast long, gentle shadows, painting the scene in hues of peace. The elderly man, despite his initial skepticism, found himself marveling at the transformation. He had witnessed Roman legions organize themselves with such precision, but never had he seen a civilian multitude, driven by hunger and weariness, respond with such quiet obedience. He looked at the faces around him, no longer frantic or desperate, but expectant, patient. He saw children, their initial restlessness fading, now sitting quietly, their eyes wide with wonder. A strange warmth, unfamiliar and comforting, began to spread through his chest. The fisherman from Capernaum, who had navigated the unpredictable currents of the lake and the chaotic markets of towns, watched the unfolding order with a professional admiration. He saw the disciples, once overwhelmed, now moving with a quiet confidence, their faces reflecting the serene purpose of their teacher. He noticed the patterns emerging on the hillside to groups of 100, then smaller groups of 50 to a system that made sense, that brought clarity to the overwhelming scale of the crowd. The gentle lapping of waves against the distant shore of the Sea of Galilee provided a constant, soothing rhythm, a counterpoint to the quiet rustling of cloaks and the soft murmurs of thousands settling into place. The scent of wild thyme and sun-baked earth, carried on a light breeze, mingled with the subtle aroma of freshly broken bread that seemed to emanate from somewhere, though he couldn't quite place it. From his vantage point, Jesus surveyed the scene. The hillside, once a testament to human need and disarray, was now a tapestry of orderly groups, a mosaic of humanity patiently waiting. The soft hues of late afternoon bathed the scene in a warm, golden light, illuminating the faces of the multitude, each one a story, each one a soul. He saw the mother, her child's head resting on her shoulder, a look of quiet anticipation on her face. He saw the elderly man, his skepticism softened by a dawning wonder. He saw the fisherman, his gaze keen and observant, absorbing every detail. The air itself seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a profound stillness that belied the thousands gathered. The collective breath of the multitude, once ragged with worry, now seemed to synchronize, a gentle, rhythmic sigh of peace. The orderly rows of people, stretching across the verdant slope, created an unexpected beauty, a visual testament to the power of a single, clear intention. It was as if the very land had been prepared, not just for rest, but for something far greater, something that transcended the immediate hunger, something that whispered of divine provision and boundless abundance. The stage was set, not with elaborate props or dramatic lighting, but with the simple, profound order of human beings patiently waiting on a green, sun-drenched hillside. The stage was set, not with elaborate props or dramatic lighting, but with the simple, profound order of human beings patiently waiting on a green, sun-drenched hillside. Jesus, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of faces, felt the weight of their collective hope and their profound, gnawing hunger. He saw the mother clutching her child, the elderly man leaning heavily on his staff, the young fisherman from Capernaum whose eyes held a flicker of both curiosity and skepticism. He saw the disciples, Andrew and Philip, standing a little apart, their faces etched with a mixture of bewilderment and quiet despair, their practical minds still grappling with the sheer impossibility of the situation. He knew their hearts, understood their human limitations, and felt a deep, abiding compassion that transcended the immediate logistical challenge. He had asked Philip the question earlier, not because he himself was unsure, but to draw out the disciples' understanding, to prepare them for the revelation that was about to unfold, to show them the chasm between human capacity and divine provision. A gentle breeze, carrying the faint, sweet scent of wild thyme from the sun-baked earth, rustled through the short grasses, a soft sigh across the hillside. The golden light of the late afternoon sun, now beginning its slow descent, painted the scene in hues of warmth, softening the edges of the distant mountains and making the surface of the Sea of Galilee shimmer like hammered gold. The rhythmic lapping of waves against the distant shore provided a constant, soothing counterpoint to the low murmur of the crowd, a sound that spoke of eternity and the ceaseless flow of time. Jesus turned, his eyes finding Andrew, who still held the small, humble offering in his hands, 5 barley loaves, coarse and simple, and 2 small, dried fish. Andrew, his brow furrowed with a lingering sense of inadequacy, extended them towards Jesus, his gaze dropping slightly, as if apologizing for the meager provision. He had found the boy, a small, unassuming figure who had offered all he had, a gesture of pure, unadulterated generosity that had touched Andrew deeply, even as his logical mind struggled to reconcile it with the enormity of the need. He had seen the child's earnestness, his willingness to share his precious meal, and it had stirred something within Andrew, a tiny spark of hope against the overwhelming tide of doubt. Yet, the numbers remained, stark and unyielding, in his mind. Jesus took the basket from Andrew's hands, his fingers brushing against the rough texture of the woven reeds, a silent acknowledgement of the small boy's gift, of Andrew's effort, of the human willingness to offer what little one possessed. He held the basket before him, not as a magician about to perform a trick, but as a priest preparing for a sacred rite. His movements were deliberate, imbued with a profound reverence that instantly quieted the last vestiges of murmuring in the crowd. A hush fell, deep and expectant, as if the very air held its breath, sensing the profound significance of the moment. The mother in the crowd, her child now nestled against her side, felt a sudden, inexplicable calm wash over her. Her earlier anxiety about the coming night, about the emptiness of her family's stomachs, began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. She watched Jesus, her eyes fixed on his serene face, a face that held both the weariness of human experience and the boundless peace of divine understanding. His presence alone was a balm, a promise whispered on the breeze. She had come seeking healing, seeking words of comfort, and now, as the sun dipped lower, she felt something more profound stirring within her, a sense of being truly seen and cared for, not just as one of many, but as an individual soul. The elderly man, who had leaned on his staff with a skeptical air, straightened slightly, his keen, aged eyes narrowed in observation. He had seen many charlatans in his long life, many who promised much and delivered little. He had come out of a deep-seated curiosity, a faint, almost forgotten yearning for something more, but his hardened heart remained wary. Yet, as he watched Jesus, he detected no artifice, no theatricality, only a profound, unwavering sincerity that resonated deep within him, stirring a memory of simpler, more hopeful times. The reverence in Jesus's posture, the quiet intensity of his gaze, held the old man captive. Jesus lifted his eyes towards the vast, azure dome of the heavens, a sky that stretched endlessly above them, mirroring the boundless nature of the divine. His lips moved in a silent prayer of gratitude, a blessing offered not just for the humble food, but for the very act of provision, for the life that sustained them all. He held the loaves and fish aloft for a brief, sacred moment, a gesture of consecration, acknowledging the source of all abundance. The golden light caught the rough texture of the barley bread, the silver gleam of the dried fish, transforming them, for an instant, into something more than mere sustenance, into symbols of a deeper truth. Then, with a gentle, deliberate motion, he began to break the loaves. The crisp, tearing sound of the bread, though soft, seemed to echo in the profound silence of the hillside, a sound that was both ordinary and utterly extraordinary. He did not break them in a hurried, frantic manner, but with a measured grace, as if each piece held infinite value. He broke one loaf, then another, and another, his hands moving with an unhurried rhythm. As he broke the bread, he also divided the two small fish, carefully separating them into smaller portions. Andrew watched, his breath caught in his throat. He saw Jesus break a piece, and then another, and yet, the basket in his hand seemed to remain full, miraculously replenishing itself even as the pieces were taken. His pragmatic mind, so accustomed to the finite nature of things, struggled to comprehend what his eyes were witnessing. It was not a trick of light or shadow, but a tangible, undeniable multiplication. A thrill, cold and exhilarating, shot through him, chasing away the last vestiges of his doubt. His heart, which had been heavy with worry, now swelled with a nascent awe, a burgeoning faith that transcended all logic. He felt a profound sense of privilege, of being present at a moment that defied all human understanding, a moment that would forever reshape his perception of reality. Philip, standing a little further back, his analytical mind still trying to calculate the impossible, blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. He had seen Jesus break the first loaf, then the second. He had expected the basket to empty quickly, to reveal the stark reality of their limited resources. But it did not. He saw Jesus hand a generous portion to a disciple, and then immediately break another piece from what seemed to be an unending supply. His calculations, his careful assessment of costs and resources, crumbled in the face of this impossible reality. His logical framework, which had always provided him with a sense of security, now felt utterly inadequate, shattered by the undeniable evidence of his own eyes. A sense of profound wonder, almost disorienting in its intensity, began to replace his earlier despair, expanding his understanding of true wealth beyond mere currency. Jesus then began to hand the broken pieces of bread and fish to his disciples, his gaze meeting each of theirs with a quiet, knowing intensity. He gave them the sacred task of distribution, making them active participants in the unfolding miracle. He placed a substantial portion into Andrew's outstretched hands, the warmth of the fresh bread a tangible sensation against his skin. Andrew, still reeling from the visual evidence of the multiplication, felt a surge of energy, a renewed purpose. He looked down at the bread, then back at Jesus, a silent question in his eyes, a question answered by the serene confidence in Jesus's face. He understood then that he was not merely carrying food, he was carrying a manifestation of divine grace, a testament to boundless provision. The disciples, their initial shock giving way to a profound sense of awe and exhilaration, moved with a newfound purpose among the seated multitude. They walked along the neat rows, their steps light, their faces reflecting the wonder they had just witnessed. They carried the baskets, which, moments before, had held only the meager offering, and now seemed to be overflowing with an endless supply of warm, fragrant bread and tender, flaky fish. The air, which had carried the scent of wild herbs and sun-baked earth, now began to fill with the rich, comforting aroma of freshly broken bread, mingling with the subtle, savory scent of the fish. It was a smell that spoke of home, of sustenance, of life itself, a scent that stirred deep, primal instincts of comfort and security within the hungry crowd. The mother, her child's small hand clutching her dress, watched as a disciple approached her row. He moved with a quiet dignity, his basket seeming impossibly full. He offered her a piece of the warm, crusty bread and a portion of the fish. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and took the food. The bread was warm to the touch, soft and yielding, and the fish was tender, flaking easily. She broke off a piece for her child, who eagerly took it, his eyes wide with delight. As she took her first bite, a wave of profound relief washed over her, a physical sensation that started in her stomach and spread through her entire being. The taste was simple, yet utterly delicious, a taste of pure, unadulterated nourishment. It was more than just food, it was a promise fulfilled, a tangible expression of care that transcended all her anxieties. Her heart, which had been burdened by the daily struggle for survival, now felt light, brimming with a quiet joy and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The elderly man, observing the disciple approach his section, watched with a critical eye. He saw the disciple offer food to the person next to him, then to the next, and still, the basket seemed to hold an unending supply. When the disciple finally reached him, he offered a generous portion. The old man took the bread and fish, his gnarled fingers closing around the warm, substantial pieces. He examined the bread, noting its simple, wholesome texture, the faint scent of barley. He took a bite, slowly, deliberately. The taste was earthy, satisfying, a taste that spoke of honest labor and simple goodness. His skepticism, which had been a lifelong companion, began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, almost childlike wonder. He had seen many things in his life, but never anything like this. This was not a trick, this was real, tangible, abundant provision. A warmth spread through his chest, not just from the food, but from a renewal of hope he thought long lost, a quiet belief that perhaps, after all, there was more to the world than hardship and toil. The fisherman from Capernaum, observing from his vantage point, watched the disciples move through the crowd with an almost mechanical precision, yet with an underlying sense of awe in their movements. He saw them distribute the food, and then, inexplicably, return to Jesus, their baskets still full, to receive more. He had known the Sea of Galilee intimately, had understood its moods and its bounty, but this defied all his understanding of natural laws. He saw the faces of the people, their initial hunger giving way to expressions of profound satisfaction, their murmurs of anticipation transforming into quiet exclamations of joy. He had come out of local interest, a casual observer, but now he felt himself becoming something more, a witness to an event that would surely echo through time. His practical, mundane understanding of the world was being broadened, stretched to encompass something extraordinary, something miraculous. He knew, with an undeniable certainty, that he would carry this story back to his village, not as a tale, but as a truth he had seen with his own eyes. The distribution continued, an orderly ballet of compassion and provision across the verdant hillside. The disciples, moving with a tireless energy, walked among the thousands, offering sustenance to every man, woman, and child. The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the landscape, painting the scene in rich, warm hues. The air was filled with the soft sounds of people eating, of quiet conversations, of children's contented sighs. The gentle lapping of the waves against the distant shore continued its soothing rhythm, a constant, peaceful backdrop to the unfolding miracle. Everyone ate. They ate until they were not just no longer hungry, but until they were truly satisfied, their bellies full, their hearts light. There was no rush, no desperate scramble for food, for the supply seemed endless, flowing freely from the hands of the disciples. The food was not merely enough, it was abundant, lavish, exceeding all expectation. The taste was simple, yet deeply nourishing, a taste that spoke of care and generosity. The mother watched her child, his face smeared with breadcrumbs, a contented smile on his lips. She felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that settled deep within her. Her faith in Jesus' care and provision, which had been a flickering ember, now burned brightly, transforming her anxiety into a peaceful gratitude that warmed her from the inside out. She knew, with an unwavering certainty, that they would be cared for, that their needs would be met, not just for this day, but for all their days. The elderly man, having finished his meal, leaned back against the gentle slope of the hill, his staff resting beside him. He looked out at the shimmering Sea of Galilee, then up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. His hardened skepticism had melted away, replaced by a quiet wonder, a profound belief that settled deep in his soul. He felt a sense of renewal, a hope he thought long lost, stirring within him, a gentle warmth that spread through his weary bones. He had come seeking answers, and he had found them, not in words, but in the simple, miraculous act of shared bread. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, painting the western horizon in streaks of orange and purple, the disciples began to gather the fragments that remained. Jesus, with his characteristic foresight, instructed them to collect all the leftovers, so that nothing would be wasted. And as they did, a new wave of astonishment swept through them, for they filled 12 baskets with the broken pieces of bread and fish, more than they had started with, a tangible testament to the boundless nature of the miracle. The hillside, which had been a place of hunger and uncertainty, was now a place of satisfaction and profound peace. The air, once filled with the subtle tension of need, now hummed with a quiet contentment, a deep, abiding gratitude. The miracle was not just in the multiplication of food, but in the transformation of hearts, in the profound realization that true abundance came not from scarcity, but from boundless love and divine provision. The multitude, their hunger satisfied, their spirits renewed, began to stir, a quiet, peaceful movement across the darkening hillside, carrying with them not just full bellies, but full hearts, a profound sense of awe, and a deep, abiding peace that would carry them through the night and into the dawn of a new, hope-filled day. The multitude, their hunger satisfied, their spirits renewed, began to stir, a quiet, peaceful movement across the darkening hillside, carrying with them not just full bellies, but full hearts, a profound sense of awe, and a deep, abiding peace that would carry them through the night and into the dawn of a new, hope-filled day. As the last rays of the setting sun painted the western sky in hues of soft rose and deep violet, casting long, gentle shadows across the now contented faces, Jesus turned his gaze towards his disciples. His voice, though low, carried a resonant clarity that cut through the soft murmurs of the crowd, a gentle command that held the weight of profound wisdom. "Gather up the fragments that remain," he instructed, his eyes sweeping over the scattered crumbs and broken pieces of bread that lay upon the grass, so that nothing is lost. Andrew, who had been watching the satisfied faces of the crowd with a look of bewildered wonder, straightened his shoulders, the initial shock of the miracle slowly giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. He had seen the impossible, had participated in it, and now a new instruction, simple yet profound, was given. He looked to Philip, whose usual analytical expression had softened into something akin to reverence, and then to the other disciples, a silent understanding passing between them. This was not merely about cleaning up, this was about a deeper truth, a lesson in stewardship echoing across the verdant slopes. The mother in the crowd, her small child now asleep against her shoulder, a faint smile gracing his lips, watched the disciples begin their task. Her own stomach was full, a sensation of warmth and contentment spreading through her that felt almost foreign after so many days of gnawing hunger. She had seen the baskets of bread and fish passed amongst them, had felt the rough texture of the barley bread in her hands, had tasted the sweet, flaky fish, and had watched as it never seemed to diminish, even as she passed it to her neighbors. Now, as the disciples moved with a quiet diligence, carefully collecting every last crumb, a new understanding bloomed within her. It was not just about feeding the hungry, it was about honoring the gift, about cherishing every blessing, no matter how small. Her heart swelled with a gratitude so profound it brought a tear to her eye, a silent prayer of thanks rising within her for this man who cared not only for their hunger but for their dignity, for the very essence of abundance. The elderly man, who had leaned heavily on his staff for so long, now stood a little straighter, his eyes, once clouded with skepticism, now alight with a quiet, astonished wonder. He watched as Peter, his usually boisterous demeanor subdued by the day's events, knelt to carefully scoop up a handful of broken bread, placing it gently into a woven basket he carried. This was not the wasteful abandon he had come to expect from large gatherings, nor the desperate scramble for scraps that often followed. This was an act of reverence, a testament to the sacredness of what had just occurred. He had seen the bread multiply, had felt its warmth in his hands, had tasted its simple, life-giving goodness. Now, he saw the careful gathering of the remnants, and it struck him with the force of a revelation. This was not a magic trick, but a divine act, imbued with purpose and respect for every particle of creation. His skepticism had not merely been overcome, it had been utterly dissolved, replaced by a deep, confirming sense of belief that settled into the very core of his being. Philip, ever the one to count and calculate, found himself moving with a deliberate slowness, his mind still grappling with the sheer impossibility of what had transpired. He read his own words, the 200 denarii that would not be enough, the utter inadequacy of human resources against such a vast need. Now, as he picked up a piece of fish, still miraculously moist and flavorful, and placed it into a basket, a profound sense of awe washed over him. It was not just that they had eaten, it was that there was more. He had witnessed the transformation of scarcity into superabundance, a concept that defied every logical framework he had ever known. His hands, usually accustomed to the precise handling of coins and ledgers, now moved with a new kind of reverence, gathering the fragments as if each one held a piece of the divine mystery he had just witnessed. The world, as he understood it, had irrevocably shifted, expanding to encompass a reality far grander than his numbers could ever quantify. The fisherman from Capernaum, who had observed the entire spectacle with the keen, discerning eye of one accustomed to the unpredictable bounty of the lake, watched the disciples with a knowing nod. He understood the value of every catch, the importance of not wasting even the smallest fish. To see this same principle applied to such an extraordinary miracle, to witness the careful stewardship of divine provision, resonated deeply within him. He had seen men squander their blessings, had witnessed the fleeting nature of earthly abundance. But this careful gathering of the fragments spoke of a different kind of wealth, one that honored every morsel, every blessing, and understood that true abundance was not just about having enough, but about cherishing what was given. He knew that when he returned to his village, his story would not just be of a miraculous feeding, but of a profound lesson in gratitude and respect for life itself. One by one, the disciples moved through the rows of people, now mostly settled into quiet contemplation, their baskets growing heavier with the collected fragments. There was a quiet dignity in their movements, a shared understanding of the sacred task they were performing. Andrew, his brow furrowed in concentration, found himself marveling at the sheer volume of what they were collecting. It wasn't just a few crumbs, it was substantial pieces of bread, still fresh, still imbued with the miraculous essence of the meal. He remembered the 5 small loaves, the 2 small fish, and the seemingly insurmountable challenge. Now, he was collecting the leftovers from feeding thousands, and the quantity was astonishing. As the last of the fragments were gathered, the disciples converged near Jesus, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They laid the baskets at his feet, and a hush fell over the hillside, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the waves against the distant shore and the soft rustle of the evening breeze through the olive trees. There were 12 baskets in total, each one brimming, overflowing with the broken pieces of barley bread and fish. 12 baskets, a full measure for each of the 12 disciples, a symbolic affirmation of the superabundance they had just witnessed. A collective gasp rippled through the multitude, a sound of pure astonishment. They had eaten their fill, had seen the food passed amongst them, but to see the sheer volume of what remained, carefully collected and presented, was a tangible, undeniable proof of the miracle's magnitude. It was far more than the initial offering, far more than anyone could have imagined. It was an abundance that defied all earthly logic, a testament to a generosity that knew no bounds. The mother in the crowd held her sleeping child closer, her gaze fixed on the overflowing baskets. Her heart felt light, buoyant with a joy that transcended the simple satisfaction of a full stomach. She had come seeking healing, seeking hope, and she had found not just sustenance, but a confirmation of a love so vast, so encompassing, that it cared for every need, down to the smallest crumb. Her anxiety, a constant companion for so long, had been replaced by a profound, peaceful gratitude, a quiet worship rising from the depths of her soul. The elderly man, leaning on his staff, felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in decades. He had seen many things in his long life, had witnessed both great hardship and fleeting joys, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. The sight of the 12 overflowing baskets, a triumphant display of divine provision, shattered any lingering doubt. He had come a skeptic, but he would leave a believer, his spirit renewed, his hope rekindled, his heart filled with an awe that bordered on worship. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he had witnessed something truly sacred, something that would forever change the landscape of his understanding. Philip, standing amongst his fellow disciples, looked from the baskets to Jesus, a profound reverence etched on his face. His carefully constructed world of numbers and resources had been utterly transformed. He had calculated scarcity, Jesus had demonstrated abundance. He had seen the limits of human provision, Jesus had revealed the boundlessness of divine grace. The sight of the overflowing baskets was not just a confirmation of a miracle, it was a redefinition of wealth, a testament to a power that transcended all earthly limitations. His mind, once so focused on what was lacking, was now filled with the overwhelming confirmation of what was abundantly given. The fisherman from Capernaum watched the scene unfold, his strong hands instinctively clenching, then relaxing. He had seen the sun set over the Sea of Galilee countless times, had witnessed the quiet rhythms of nature, but this evening held a different kind of magic, a profound, confirming truth. He knew the stories he would carry back to his village would not be mere tales, but living testimonies of a power that could feed thousands from a handful of bread and fish, and then gather up 12 baskets of what remained. It was a story of abundance, of careful stewardship, of a compassionate heart that cared for every single person, leaving no one hungry and nothing wasted. As the last vestiges of daylight faded, giving way to the soft glow of the rising moon, the multitude began to disperse, a quiet, orderly procession down the hillside. There were perhaps 5,000 men, besides the women and children, a vast throng of humanity, all of whom had been fed, all of whom had witnessed the impossible. Their murmurs were no longer of hunger or weariness, but of wonder and awe, of quiet celebration and worship. They carried with them not just the memory of a miraculous meal, but the tangible proof of divine care, the image of those 12 overflowing baskets etched into their minds and hearts. It was a triumph of compassion, a confirmation of boundless love, and an astonishing display of provision that would resonate within them long after the stars had claimed the night sky. The sun, now a molten orb sinking towards the western horizon, cast long, golden fingers across the hillside, painting the verdant slopes in hues of amber and rose. A hush had fallen over the multitude, not of exhaustion, but of profound contentment, a deep, resonant peace that settled into their very bones. The last morsels of bread and fish had been consumed, the 12 baskets brimming with leftovers now secured, a tangible testament to the day's impossible abundance. The air, once thick with the murmur of thousands, now carried only the gentle sigh of the evening breeze, the distant, rhythmic lapping of the Sea of Galilee, and the occasional, soft sigh of a child nestled against a parent's chest. A mother in the crowd, her small child finally asleep in her arms, leaned back against the warm earth, a profound sense of relief washing over her. Her stomach was full, her child's hunger sated, and the gnawing anxiety that had been a constant companion for so long had, for this precious moment, completely vanished. She looked at the faces around her, illuminated by the fading light, and saw mirrored in their eyes the same quiet wonder, the same deep-seated gratitude. Her own eyes, usually clouded with worry, now sparkled with a renewed hope, a fervent belief that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was not as harsh and unforgiving as it often seemed. She thought of the simple, miraculous bread, how it had tasted sweeter than any she had ever known, how it had filled her not just with sustenance, but with an inexplicable sense of being truly seen, truly cared for. This man, Jesus, had looked at their hunger, their vast numbers, and had not despaired, had not turned them away, but had instead provided beyond all measure. It was a recognition, deep within her weary heart, that this was no ordinary teacher, no mere healer, but someone touched by the divine itself. An elderly man who had watched the entire proceedings with a skepticism honed by decades of hardship, now found his hardened shell beginning to crack. He had seen charlatans and false prophets, had heard grand promises that always dissolved into dust. But this was different. He had observed the orderly distribution, the disciples moving with a quiet purpose, the endless supply from so little. He had eaten the bread himself, felt its warmth, tasted its simple goodness, and watched as his neighbors, too, had eaten their fill. The sight of the 12 overflowing baskets, gathered from what should have been nothing, was an image that defied all his experience, all his logical understanding of the world. He gripped his staff, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on Jesus, who stood a little apart, observing the contented crowd with a serene, almost withdrawn expression. A profound shift occurred within the old man, a quiet surrender of his long-held cynicism. A spark of hope, one he thought long extinguished, flickered to leave within him, warming the cold corners of his soul. He had come out of curiosity, expecting to be disappointed, but instead, he had witnessed something truly sacred, something that promised a different kind of future, a different kind of king. As the last vestiges of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, a murmur began to ripple through the crowd, growing in intensity like the rising tide. It was a murmur of recognition, of fervent understanding. "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world," a voice declared, clear and strong, cutting through the evening air. Others quickly echoed the sentiment, their voices rising in a swelling chorus. "He is the one. He is the Messiah. He must be our King." The words carried an exultant energy, a collective surge of conviction. They had seen the miracle, felt its profound impact, and now, in their hearts, they understood its meaning. This man, who had fed them with such compassion and power, was the one foretold, the one who would lead them, who would deliver them from their burdens and establish a new kingdom. The air vibrated with their newfound resolve, a powerful, almost overwhelming desire to elevate him, to crown him, to make him their earthly ruler. Their gratitude had transformed into a fervent political aspiration, a yearning for immediate, tangible change. Jesus, standing a little distance away, felt the shift in the crowd's energy, the rising tide of their intentions. He saw the fire in their eyes, heard the conviction in their voices, understood the deep, human longing that fueled their desire to make him king by force. His gaze swept over the multitude, a profound sadness mingling with his deep compassion. He knew their hearts, their desperate need for a deliverer, for someone to lift the yoke of Roman oppression and bring about a kingdom of earthly prosperity. But his kingdom was not of this world, and his mission was not to wield temporal power. He had come to offer a different kind of liberation, a spiritual abundance that transcended earthly concerns. He had fed their bodies, yes, but only as a sign, a tangible illustration of the deeper nourishment he offered for their souls. His eyes met Andrew's, then Philip's, who stood a little closer, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and a dawning, uneasy understanding of the crowd's intent. Andrew, ever the pragmatist, now saw the potential for chaos, the volatile nature of such fervent belief. He had witnessed the miracle, his skepticism utterly dissolved, but now he felt a different kind of apprehension. Philip, who had calculated the impossible cost of bread, now perhaps calculated the impossible cost of such a kingship, the inevitable clash with Roman authority, the misunderstanding of what Jesus truly represented. He saw the longing in the people's eyes, but also the potential for a dangerous misinterpretation of divine power. Jesus offered them a small, knowing smile, a silent communication that transcended words. He understood their desire, but he also understood the path he must walk, a path that led away from earthly crowns and towards a spiritual cross. His presence, though gentle, radiated a resolute strength, an unwavering commitment to his divine purpose. He knew that to accept their offer of kingship now would be to betray the very essence of his mission, to become entangled in the fleeting concerns of human politics. His power was not for domination, but for transformation, his kingdom not of armies, but of hearts. With a quiet, almost imperceptible movement, Jesus began to withdraw, his steps deliberate, his gaze fixed on the darkening slopes of the mountain that rose majestically behind them. He moved with a grace that seemed to part the throng, a silent command in his demeanor. He did not speak, did not explain, for he knew that in this moment of fervent excitement, words would be futile. He needed solitude, the quiet communion with his Father, to reaffirm his path, to recalibrate his spirit amidst the clamor of human expectation. The mountain, with its ancient silence and proximity to the heavens, called to him, offering a sanctuary from the demands of the world. He ascended its slopes, his figure gradually receding into the deepening twilight, a spiritual retreat from the very people he had just blessed so profoundly. His departure was not a rejection, but an act of unwavering faithfulness to his true calling, a resolute commitment to his spiritual mission. The disciples, watching him go, felt a pang of something akin to bewilderment, perhaps even a touch of disappointment. They, too, had been swept up in the crowd's exultation, had perhaps even entertained the thought of Jesus as an earthly king, a leader who would restore Israel to its former glory. But his quiet withdrawal, his deliberate turning away from worldly power, spoke volumes. It was a powerful, silent lesson, a stark contrast to the human desire for glory and dominion. They watched until his form was swallowed by the shadows, a sense of lingering wonder still clinging to them, mixed now with a quiet, reflective understanding of his unique, spiritual authority. As the last sliver of light faded from the sky, giving way to the velvet expanse of night, the disciples began to move towards the shore, towards where their boat was moored. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of the lake and the lingering aroma of wild thyme. The crowd, though still buzzing with the day's events, slowly began to disperse, their exultant energy gradually mellowing into a peaceful, reflective hum. Some lingered, reluctant to leave the sacred space, but the absence of Jesus, the quiet withdrawal of their teacher, signaled the end of this extraordinary day. Andrew, his mind still reeling from the day's events, helped secure the boat, his hands moving with the familiar rhythm of a fisherman. He thought of the small boy, of his 5 loaves and 2 fish, of his own initial despair, and then of the impossible abundance that had followed. He looked out at the shimmering surface of the Sea of Galilee, now reflecting the first scattered stars, and felt a profound sense of awe. His faith, once a fragile seedling, had been watered and nourished by this miracle, growing into something stronger, more resilient. He understood now, perhaps more deeply than ever before, that true solutions often lay beyond human calculations, beyond the limits of what they could see or comprehend. The memory of the overflowing baskets, the quiet power of Jesus, would forever be etched into his soul, a testament to divine provision and boundless compassion. Philip, ever the one for practicalities, found himself strangely quiet. The numbers, the calculations, the impossibility he had so readily declared, had been utterly overturned. His analytical mind struggled to reconcile the facts with the experience. He had seen it with his own eyes, had eaten the bread, had helped gather the abundant leftovers. The world, as he understood it, had been subtly but profoundly altered. He looked at the vast, dark expanse of the lake, feeling small yet strangely expanded. The experience had forced him to confront the limits of his own logic, to acknowledge a reality that transcended mere accounting. True wealth, he now understood, was not measured in denarii or bushels, but in a different kind of currency, a divine generosity that defied all human expectations. He felt a quiet, lingering wonder, a sense of profound mystery that settled deep within him. A fisherman from Capernaum, who had observed the entire spectacle from the periphery, now untied his own small skiff, preparing to head back across the lake. He had seen many things in his life on the water, many strange occurrences, but nothing quite like this. He had watched the crowd gather, had heard the disciples' concerns about food, and had, in his own practical way, dismissed the possibility of feeding so many. He knew the sparse resources of the region, the difficulty of finding even a few fish. Yet, he had witnessed the impossible. He would carry this story back to his village, not as a wild tale, but as a sober, eyewitness account. His mundane understanding of the world, of what was possible and what was not, had been broadened, stretched by the extraordinary event. He understood that something truly profound had happened on this hillside, something that would change not just the lives of those who were fed, but perhaps the very fabric of their world. As the disciples pushed their boat away from the shore, the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull was the only sound that broke the stillness. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast a faint, ethereal glow upon the water. They looked back at the hillside, now dark and silent, save for the occasional flickering torch of a departing family. The air still carried the faint, sweet scent of wild thyme, mingling with the subtle aroma of distant salt from the lake. The warmth of the afternoon sun had given way to the cool embrace of the night, a peaceful transition that mirrored the quiet resolution settling within their hearts. They rode in silence, each lost in their own reflections, the memory of the day's miracle unfolding in their minds like a vivid dream. The overwhelming sense of exultation had receded, replaced by a deep, spiritual peace. They had witnessed not just an act of divine power, but an act of profound compassion, a testament to Jesus' unwavering care for the needy. They had seen order emerge from chaos, abundance from scarcity, and in doing so, had glimpsed the true nature of the kingdom he proclaimed. The boat glided effortlessly across the calm waters, leaving the peaceful hillside behind, but carrying with it the indelible imprint of a day that would forever redefine their understanding of faith, of provision, and of the unique, spiritual kingship of Jesus. The lingering wonder of the miracle, the quiet resolve of their teacher, and the profound sense of peace that had settled over them, would accompany them into the quiet darkness of the night, guiding their thoughts towards a deeper understanding of the divine. The gentle rocking of the boat, the soft splash of the oars, and the vast, silent expanse of the starlit sky enveloped them, inviting a restful contemplation, a quiet surrender to the profound mysteries they had just witnessed. As the small boat carrying Jesus and his disciples receded into the deepening twilight, a profound quiet began to settle over the hillside, a hush that was not merely the absence of sound but a palpable presence, a lingering echo of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. The last sliver of the sun, a molten gold, dipped below the western hills, painting the sky in hues of lavender and rose, casting long, ethereal shadows across the now dispersing multitude. The air, once vibrant with the murmur of thousands, now carried only the gentle whisper of the breeze through the wild grasses and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the waves against the shore of Galilee. The mother, her small child now fast asleep against her shoulder, felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. Her stomach, which had gnawed at her with a familiar anxiety just hours before, was now pleasantly full, a sensation of deep contentment she rarely experienced. Her son, his small hand still clutching a crumb of the miraculous bread, breathed softly, his face serene in the dimming light. She looked down at him, her heart swelling with a gratitude so immense it felt almost overwhelming. For so long, her days had been a relentless pursuit of enough food, enough safety, enough hope to carry them through. Today, in this unexpected place, she had received not just enough, but an abundance that defied all logic, a generosity that spoke of a love she had only ever dared to dream of. She remembered the moment of quiet panic, standing amidst the vast sea of faces, her child's small hand lost in hers, the sun beating down, the gnawing hunger in her own belly mirroring the unspoken fear in her son's wide eyes. The disciples had seemed so helpless, their concern genuine but their resources so pitifully small against such an overwhelming need. And then, the quiet command from Jesus, the simple act of blessing, the breaking of the bread. She had watched, mesmerized, as the baskets, seemingly bottomless, had passed from hand to hand, each piece of bread warm and fragrant, each fish tender and flaky. It had been more than just food, it had been a tangible manifestation of care, a silent promise that they were seen, they were valued, they would not be left to hunger. Now, as she carefully adjusted her sleeping child, preparing for the long walk back to their village, she felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The weariness of travel still clung to her limbs, but it was overshadowed by a deep well of peace. The anxiety that had been a constant companion had receded, replaced by a quiet confidence. She knew, with an unwavering certainty, that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would be met. The image of Jesus, his hands raised in blessing, his eyes filled with an infinite compassion, was etched into her memory, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. She would carry this memory, this feeling of profound provision, like a precious jewel, guarding it against the return of doubt, letting its gentle glow illuminate her path forward. The world around her was slowly fading into shades of indigo, but within her, a quiet, steady light had been kindled. A little distance away, the elderly man leaned heavily on his staff, his gaze fixed on the shimmering expanse of the lake, where the distant boat was now just a faint speck against the horizon. His deeply lined face, usually set in a habitual expression of weary resignation, was softened, almost bewildered. He had lived a long life, seen much, and believed little that could not be proven by the sweat of his brow or the calluses on his hands. Miracles, he had always thought, were for children's stories or the desperate pleas of the truly naive. He had followed Jesus out of a grudging curiosity, drawn by the persistent whispers of healing and wisdom, but his heart had remained guarded, his mind skeptical. When the disciples had spoken of the vastness of the crowd, the impossibility of feeding them, he had nodded in grim agreement. Indeed, he had muttered to himself, "These men speak sense. What good is a prophet's word against an empty stomach?" He had braced himself for the inevitable disappointment, the dispersal of the hungry crowd, the return to the harsh realities of scarcity. But then, the boy with his small offering, the blessing, the distribution. He had watched, his eyes narrowed, searching for a trick, a sleight of hand. He had seen no such thing. Only the steady, unending flow of bread and fish passed from hand to hand, until his own calloused fingers had closed around a warm, crusty piece of bread and a succulent portion of fish. He had eaten slowly, savoring each bite, not just for its taste but for the sheer impossibility of its presence. It had been real, tangible, filling. And then, the baskets of leftovers, more than had been started with, a testament to an abundance that defied every law of nature he had ever known. His skepticism, a fortress built over decades of hardship, had begun to crumble, brick by slow brick, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning wonder. He had seen the faces of the people around him, their initial doubt giving way to awe, then to a profound, almost childlike joy. He had felt it too, a lightness in his chest he hadn't experienced since his youth, a hope he thought long extinguished. Now, as the stars began to prickle through the darkening sky, he felt a strange, unfamiliar peace settle over him. The world, which had always seemed a harsh and unforgiving place, suddenly felt imbued with a hidden generosity, a boundless compassion he had never truly believed in. He tightened his grip on his staff, but it was no longer a prop against a cruel world, it was simply a tool for his journey. The weight of his years, the burden of his cynicism, seemed to have lifted, leaving him feeling lighter, more open. He would return to his village not with tales of a charismatic speaker, but with the quiet, undeniable truth of a miracle, a truth that had touched his own hardened heart and filled it with a gentle, unexpected light. He looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky, a sky he had gazed upon countless times, but tonight it seemed to hold a new, profound meaning, a silent testament to a power far beyond his understanding, yet intimately connected to the warmth in his belly and the peace in his soul. The fisherman from Capernaum, his sturdy frame silhouetted against the deepening blue, stood by the water's edge, watching the last of the crowds melt away into the twilight. He had seen many strange things in his years on the lake, witnessed the sudden fury of storms and the unexpected bounty of a good catch. He understood the rhythms of nature, the hard work required for survival, the constant struggle against the elements. He had watched the day unfold with a practical eye, assessing the situation as he would a fishing expedition. The sheer number of people, the lack of provisions, the remote location to it had all pointed to an inevitable crisis, a hungry, disgruntled crowd dispersing into the night. He had known the disciples, some of them fellow fishermen, and he had seen the genuine distress in their faces as they grappled with the impossible task. He had even heard the quiet, almost resigned suggestion from Jesus to feed them, a suggestion that had seemed utterly absurd given the circumstances. But then, the miracle. He had been close enough to see the baskets, to witness the endless distribution, to feel the warmth of the bread and the texture of the fish in his own hands. He had eaten, not out of hunger, for he had brought his own small provisions, but out of a profound curiosity, a need to verify with his own senses what his mind struggled to comprehend. It was not a trick of the light, nor an illusion. It was real. The food had been real, the satisfaction of the crowd had been real, and the 12 baskets of leftovers, carefully collected by the disciples, were undeniably real. He had watched them being filled, each one brimming with the remnants of an impossible feast. His world, a world governed by the predictable laws of nature and the tangible efforts of man, had been momentarily, profoundly, upended. Now, as the first stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky, he felt a quiet sense of awe. He was not a man given to grand pronouncements or fervent belief, but he knew what he had seen. He knew the limitations of 5 loaves and 2 fish. He knew the impossibility of feeding 5,000 with them. Yet, it had happened. He would carry this story back to Capernaum, not as a wild tale, but as a sober, eyewitness account. He would tell it to his family, to his fellow fishermen, perhaps even to the skeptical merchants in the market. His understanding of the world, once so firmly anchored in the practical and the observable, had been subtly but irrevocably broadened. The lake, which he knew so intimately, now seemed to hold deeper secrets. The very air seemed to hum with a quiet, powerful energy. He turned from the water's edge, his steps firm and unhurried. The path back to Capernaum would be long, but the journey felt different now. The familiar constellations that began to emerge above him seemed to shine with a new intensity, each star a tiny pinprick of wonder in the vast darkness. He thought of Jesus, not just as a teacher or a healer, but as someone who could bend the very fabric of reality, not for power or glory, but out of a simple, profound compassion for hungry people. The world had not changed, the lake was still the lake, and the hills were still the hills, but his perception of them had shifted, imbued with a quiet, lingering sense of the divine. As the last stragglers departed, their footsteps rustling softly through the dry grass, the hillside gradually returned to its ancient stillness. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine from a hidden crevice, mingling with the earthy aroma of the sun-baked soil. The gentle lapping of the waves against the distant shore became the dominant sound, a timeless lullaby that had cradled this land for millennia. The moon, a slender crescent, began its slow ascent, casting a silvery sheen across the tranquil waters of Galilee, turning the ripples into shimmering pathways of light. The scattered remnants of the day, a forgotten sandal, a small stone that had served as a seat, a few stray crumbs of bread that would soon be claimed by the night creatures, were all that remained of the vast gathering. The energy of the multitude had dissipated, but in its place, a profound peace settled, a quiet reverence that seemed to permeate the very earth. The hillside, which had witnessed such a dramatic display of human need and divine abundance, now rested, bathed in the soft glow of the moon and stars, a silent testament to the extraordinary kindness that had unfolded upon its slopes. The wind whispered through the olive trees, a soft, sighing sound, carrying with it the lingering echoes of gratitude and wonder. The Sea of Galilee, a vast mirror reflecting the countless stars, seemed to breathe in and out with the rhythm of the universe, its surface calm and undisturbed. The world, having witnessed a miracle, now settled into a deep, restorative sleep, inviting all who had been touched by its grace to find their own quiet rest, their hearts full, their spirits at peace, under the watchful, benevolent gaze of the Galilean night. The gentle darkness enveloped everything, a soft blanket of serenity, promising renewal and the quiet unfolding of another day, forever changed by the whispers of abundance. The gentle darkness enveloped everything, a soft blanket of serenity, promising renewal and the quiet unfolding of another day, forever changed by the whispers of abundance. As the last embers of the communal fires flickered and died, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and receded with the cool night breeze, a profound stillness descended upon the hillside, broken only by the distant lapping of waves against the shore and the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through the undergrowth. Most of the multitude, their bellies full and their hearts strangely lightened, had already found comfortable spots among the olive trees and terrace slopes, their bodies sinking into the soft earth, their minds drifting into dreams woven with images of overflowing baskets and the gentle smile of the Nazarene. Jesus, however, remained awake, standing near the summit of the hill, his gaze fixed upon the moon-drenched expanse of the Sea of Galilee, its surface shimmering like hammered silver under the celestial glow. The disciples, weary from the day's extraordinary events and the immense task of organizing the crowd, had gathered a little further down, some already succumbing to sleep, their heads resting against tree trunks or the shoulders of their companions, while others murmured quietly amongst themselves, their voices hushed with awe and a lingering sense of disbelief. Andrew, still clutching the empty, now sacred basket that had once held the boy's meager offering, sat apart from the others, his broad shoulders slumped slightly, his mind replaying the astonishing sequence of events, the way the bread had multiplied in Jesus' hands, the fish appearing as if from thin air, feeding thousands with such effortless grace. He felt a profound humility, a deep understanding of his own smallness in the face of such divine power, yet also a burgeoning sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that he had been chosen to witness something truly transformative. Philip, ever the pragmatist, lay on his back, staring up at the constellations that glittered like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky, his logical mind struggling to reconcile the impossible arithmetic of the day with the undeniable reality of his full stomach and the 12 overflowing baskets of leftovers. He had calculated, he had doubted, he had seen the vastness of the crowd and the scarcity of their resources, and yet, here they were, not only fed but abundantly so, a testament to a power that defied all earthly understanding, a power that both thrilled and unnerved him with its boundless potential. He wondered about the implications of such a miracle, about the expectations it would ignite in the hearts of the people, and a faint tremor of apprehension ran through him, a premonition of the challenges that lay ahead. The young boy, whose simple offering had been the catalyst for such a magnificent display of divine generosity, was nestled securely beside his mother, his small hand still grasping a piece of the miraculously multiplied bread, now slightly stale but no less precious. He was fast asleep, his dreams likely filled with the wonder of the afternoon, perhaps imagining himself a hero, or perhaps simply relishing the feeling of a full belly, a sensation that had often been a rarity in his young life. His mother watched him, a tender smile gracing her lips, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical ache, a sweet, overwhelming burden. She knew, with an unshakable certainty, that her son had played a part in something truly sacred, something that would forever mark his life and their family with a blessing beyond measure. Further down the hillside, where the crowd had dispersed into smaller, more intimate groups, the elderly man, his weathered face softened by the moonlight, shared a quiet moment with a younger woman, perhaps his daughter or granddaughter, who gently smoothed the wrinkles from his brow. He spoke in a low, resonant voice, recounting the day's events, emphasizing not just the miracle of the food, but the profound sense of peace that had settled over the multitude, the way strangers had shared their space and their stories, united by a common hunger and a shared astonishment. He had lived a long life, seen many seasons come and go, but never had he witnessed such a complete and utter transformation of despair into hope, of scarcity into abundance, and he felt a deep, abiding comfort in the knowledge that such goodness existed in the world. The fisherman from Capernaum, a man accustomed to the unpredictable whims of the sea and the harsh realities of making a living, sat by himself, cleaning the last remnants of fish from his teeth with a blade of grass. He had watched Jesus with an intensity born of a lifetime spent observing the subtle shifts of nature, the signs that foretold a good catch or a coming storm, and he recognized in the Nazarene a power far greater than any tempest, a calm authority that commanded not just the elements, but the very hearts of men. He thought of his own nets, often empty, and the endless struggle to provide for his family, and a new kind of hope, one not tied to the ebb and flow of the tides, began to stir within him, a quiet conviction that this man held the key to a different kind of provision, a more enduring sustenance. High above them all, on a distant ridge, the Roman centurion, his armor glinting faintly in the moonlight, observed the scene through a small, polished spyglass. He had been sent to monitor the gathering, to ensure that no seditious activity brewed amongst the Galilean populace, a constant concern for the occupying power. What he had witnessed, however, was not rebellion, but something far more enigmatic, a phenomenon that defied his military training and his pragmatic Roman sensibilities. He had seen the vast crowd, the apparent lack of provisions, and then, inexplicably, the orderly distribution of food, the satisfaction on the faces of thousands, all orchestrated by a single, unassuming man. He had heard the murmurs of king from the crowd, but the man had not sought a crown, he had sought only to feed. The centurion felt a strange unease, a sense that something profound and potentially disruptive to the established order had just occurred, a power that could not be contained by legions or decrees, a power that operated on a different plane entirely. He lowered his spyglass, the image of the Nazarene's serene face etched into his memory, and a shiver, not of fear but of profound bewilderment, traced its way down his spine. As the hours of the night slowly unwound, Jesus finally turned from the sea, his eyes sweeping over the sleeping multitude, a look of profound compassion softening his features. He knew the hearts of these people, their hopes and their burdens, their desperate need for both physical and spiritual nourishment. He knew that many saw in him a potential earthly king, a deliverer from Roman oppression, but his kingdom was not of this world, and his mission was far grander than mere political liberation. He walked silently among his disciples, his footsteps barely disturbing the dew-kissed grass, pausing briefly beside Peter, whose rugged face was relaxed in sleep, a faint smile playing on his lips. He then moved towards Andrew, who, despite his weariness, still sat upright, lost in thought. "Andrew," Jesus said softly, his voice a gentle murmur in the quiet night, "you are troubled." Andrew started, his eyes blinking open, surprised that Jesus had noticed him. "Master," he replied, his voice a low rasp, "I am not troubled, but I am overwhelmed. I still cannot comprehend what we witnessed today. How could it be? How could so little become so much?" Jesus sat down beside him, the cool night air rustling the leaves of a nearby fig tree. "Do you believe that with God, all things are possible, Andrew?" "Yes, Master, I believe," Andrew affirmed, though a part of his mind still grappled with the sheer impossibility of it all. But to see it, to touch it, to be a part of it, it changes everything. It makes me question all that I thought I knew about the world, about what is possible and what is not. "And that, my friend, is precisely the point," Jesus said, a faint smile touching his lips. "The world often tells us that scarcity is our lot, that limits define us, that we must hoard and protect what little we have. But the truth is, the universe is abundant, and God's provision knows no bounds. The miracle today was not just about bread and fish, Andrew, it was about revealing the true nature of the Father's heart, a heart that desires to give, to nourish, to sustain, far beyond our wildest imaginings." He paused, his gaze returning to the shimmering sea. It was also about the power of a small offering, freely given, humbly presented. That boy, in his innocent generosity, offered all he had, and in doing so, he unlocked a torrent of blessing. Andrew looked down at the empty basket in his hands, tracing the woven patterns with his thumb. He gave everything, he mused, and in return, he received more than he could ever have dreamed. "It makes me think of all the times we hold back, Master, all the times we doubt, all the times we believe our own smallness limits what God can do through us." "Indeed," Jesus agreed, his voice imbued with a quiet wisdom. "Often, the greatest obstacles are not external, but reside within our own hearts, in our fears and our lack of faith. But remember this, Andrew, God does not ask for perfection, only for willingness. He does not demand greatness, but a humble heart that trusts in His boundless grace." He placed a gentle hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Rest now, my friend. The day has been long, and there is much yet to come. Let the wonder of this night settle deep within your spirit, and know that you are a part of a greater story, a story of love and redemption that will unfold in ways you cannot yet fathom." Andrew felt a profound sense of peace wash over him, the last vestiges of his bewilderment dissolving into a quiet understanding. He nodded, a silent promise to carry these words in his heart, and finally, he lay back, closing his eyes, the image of Jesus's compassionate face lingering in his mind as he drifted into a deep, restorative sleep. As the first blush of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, casting a soft, ethereal light over the sleeping multitude, Jesus quietly rose and, without disturbing his disciples, began to ascend further up the hillside, seeking a solitary place for prayer. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth and wild thyme, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the new day. He found a secluded spot beneath an ancient olive tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the heavens like supplicating arms, and there he knelt, his heart communing with the Father, drawing strength and guidance for the arduous path that lay before him. He knew that the miracle of the loaves and fish, while a profound act of compassion, would also ignite dangerous expectations among the people, who would seek to make him an earthly king, to harness his power for their own political ends. He understood the fickle nature of crowds, their swift adoration turning to swift rejection, and he prepared his spirit for the trials that such popularity would inevitably bring. Below, as the sun slowly climbed above the horizon, casting long, slender shadows across the hillside, the multitude began to stir, their sleep-softened faces gradually awakening to the reality of their surroundings. A low murmur rose from the camp, a gentle hum of conversation and movement, as people stretched and yawned, their eyes adjusting to the growing light. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, made from beans carried by some enterprising merchants, mingled with the earthy scent of the damp ground, creating a comforting atmosphere of communal awakening. Children, their energy quickly returning, began to chase each other through the olive groves, their laughter echoing lightly across the slopes. The young boy, now fully awake, sat up and looked around, his eyes wide with a renewed sense of wonder. He still held the piece of bread, now a cherished relic, and he carefully placed it in a small pouch his mother had sewn for him. He saw his mother smiling at him, her eyes filled with a love that felt as expansive as the sky above them. He knew, without needing words, that this day, and the man who had made it so extraordinary, would forever be a part of him. The elderly man, his joints a little stiff from the night's rest on the hard ground, slowly rose, leaning on a sturdy walking stick. He looked out over the Sea of Galilee, its waters now sparkling with a million tiny lights as the sun kissed its surface, and a deep sense of gratitude filled his heart. He had witnessed a moment of pure, unadulterated grace, a glimpse into the divine, and he felt a quiet joy, a renewed faith in the goodness of the world, despite its many hardships. He knew he would carry the memory of this day, and the feeling of abundance it had brought, for the rest of his days. The fisherman from Capernaum, having spent the night reflecting on the Nazarene's power, felt a restless stir within him, a yearning for something more than the endless cycle of casting nets and mending sails. He saw Jesus, a solitary figure on the distant peak, silhouetted against the rising sun, and a profound sense of conviction settled upon him. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that his life was meant for a different purpose, a purpose that lay beyond the familiar shores of the Galilee, a purpose that involved following this extraordinary man. He made a silent vow, a quiet commitment to a new path, a new calling. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden warmth over the entire landscape, the disciples too began to awaken, their initial grogginess quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and a lingering awe from the previous day. Peter, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, stretched his powerful frame and looked around, a broad grin spreading across his face as he remembered the overflowing baskets. "Well, that was certainly a night to remember," he chuckled, nudging John, who was still half asleep. "Never thought I'd see the day when we'd have too much food." John, slowly blinking awake, merely smiled, his eyes still holding the soft, reflective glow of a man who had witnessed something truly sacred. "It was more than food, Peter," he murmured, his voice soft with reverence. "It was a revelation." Andrew, feeling refreshed and invigorated by his conversation with Jesus, stood up and surveyed the awakening multitude. He saw the faces of the people, no longer haggard with hunger or despair, but filled with a quiet hope, a gentle expectation. He knew that the miracle had not just fed their bodies, but had touched their spirits, planting seeds of faith and wonder that would, in time, bear fruit. He looked towards the peak where Jesus had ascended, a silent understanding passing between them, a shared knowledge of the profound shift that had occurred on this hillside. Later that morning, as the sun beat down with increasing intensity, Jesus, having finished his solitary prayer, descended from the peak and gathered his disciples. He spoke to them of the need to depart from the multitude, to avoid the clamor of those who sought to make him a king by force. He knew that their hearts, still reeling from the miracle, were susceptible to earthly ambitions, and he needed to guide them towards a deeper understanding of his true mission. "Go down to the boat," he instructed them, his voice calm yet firm, "and cross to the other side, to Bethsaida. I will dismiss the crowds and then join you." The disciples, though perhaps a little bewildered by this sudden departure from the adoring multitude, understood the wisdom in his words. They knew the dangers of popular fervor, the way it could quickly turn into a demanding, insatiable force. They began to make their way down to the shore, weaving through the still-stirring crowd, who, though reluctant to see them go, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. As the disciples embarked in their fishing boat, its wooden hull creaking softly against the gentle waves, Jesus turned his attention back to the multitude. He moved among them, his presence radiating a quiet authority, a gentle compassion that settled their excited spirits. He spoke to them, not of earthly kingdoms or political power, but of the bread of life, of a hunger that could only be satisfied by spiritual nourishment, of a kingdom that resided not in palaces but in the hearts of men. His words, though perhaps not fully understood by all, carried a profound resonance, a sense of truth that transcended their immediate desires. Slowly, gradually, the multitude began to disperse, their hearts still full from the previous day's abundance, their minds pondering the deeper meaning of his words. They gathered their meager belongings, said their farewells to newfound acquaintances, and began their journeys home, their footsteps tracing paths across the verdant hillside, leaving behind only the faint scent of wild herbs and the lingering echoes of a miraculous day. The hillside, once teeming with thousands, began to empty, its slopes gradually returning to their natural, serene state. The Roman centurion, watching from his distant vantage point, observed the orderly dispersal of the crowd with a mixture of relief and continued bewilderment. He had expected unrest, perhaps even a skirmish, but instead, he had witnessed a peaceful, almost reverent departure. The Nazarene, he concluded, was not a typical rebel, nor a mere charlatan. There was something profoundly different about him, something that defied the usual categories of power and influence. He made a mental note to report this unusual phenomenon to his superiors, knowing that his description would likely be met with skepticism, but feeling a deep conviction that this man, this Jesus, was a force to be reckoned with, a quiet storm brewing on the horizon of Roman Judea. He turned his horse and rode back towards the garrison, the image of the Nazarene, standing alone on the hillside, etched into his memory. As evening approached, casting long, purple shadows across the now deserted hillside, Jesus stood alone, watching the last stragglers disappear over the distant ridges, their figures growing smaller and smaller until they vanished from sight. The air grew cooler, a gentle breeze rustling through the olive trees, carrying the faint, distant sound of the waves. The Sea of Galilee, now a deep, inky blue under the deepening twilight, stretched out before him, vast and mysterious. He knew that his disciples were already out on its waters, making their way across to Bethsaida, and he felt a quiet longing to join them, to share in the solitude of the journey. He began his own descent towards the shore, his footsteps light and purposeful, his mind clear and focused. The path was familiar, worn smooth by countless travelers, and he moved with an ease born of long acquaintance with the rugged Galilean landscape. The scent of wild mint and damp earth filled the air, a comforting aroma that spoke of home and the enduring beauty of creation. As he read the water's edge, the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore became a soothing rhythm, a natural lullaby to the quiet evening. The sky above him was now a magnificent canvas of deepening blues and purples, with the first stars beginning to twinkle like scattered diamonds. The moon, a crescent sliver of silver, hung low in the western sky, casting a soft, ethereal glow upon the water. He looked out across the expanse of the sea, his gaze fixed on the distant, indistinct silhouette of the boat, a tiny speck against the vastness. He knew that the journey across the lake could be treacherous, prone to sudden storms and unpredictable winds, and a quiet concern for his disciples stirred within him. He walked along the shoreline for a time, the cool sand yielding beneath his feet, the gentle spray of the waves kissing his ankles. The silence of the night was profound, broken only by the rhythmic whisper of the water and the occasional cry of a night bird. He felt a deep connection to this land, to these waters, to the very fabric of creation that surrounded him. It was here, in the quiet solitude of nature, that he often found solace and strength, communing with the Father, preparing his spirit for the challenges that lay ahead. As the night deepened and the stars grew brighter, Jesus made his way to a secluded cove, a small, hidden beach nestled between rocky outcrops, where the water was calm and still. He sat down on a smooth, water-worn stone, his eyes once again fixed upon the distant horizon, where the faint outline of the boat could still be discerned. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep, cleansing breath, allowing the peace of the night to wash over him, to replenish his spirit. He knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with difficulties, with misunderstandings and betrayals, but he also knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he was not alone, that the Father's love and guidance would sustain him through every trial. The gentle darkness enveloped everything, a soft blanket of serenity, promising renewal and the quiet unfolding of another day, forever changed by the whispers of abundance. The Sea of Galilee, a vast mirror reflecting the countless stars, seemed to breathe in and out with the rhythm of the universe, its surface calm and undisturbed, inviting all who had been touched by its grace to find their own quiet rest, their hearts full, their spirits at peace, under the watchful, benevolent gaze of the Galilean night. The world, having witnessed a miracle, now settled into a deep, restorative sleep, its silent promise of renewal echoing in the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. The gentle darkness, having enveloped the hillside, now deepened into the profound quiet of a moonless night, where only the distant, rhythmic sigh of the Sea of Galilee broke the pervasive stillness, a sound as ancient and comforting as time itself. The last lingering embers of the cooking fires, which had once warmed the simple meal, now glowed like sleepy eyes scattered across the vast expanse where thousands had gathered, their warmth slowly fading as the chill of the desert night began its subtle descent from the eastern hills. Most of the multitude had dispersed, their bellies full and their hearts strangely lightened, following the faint paths back to their villages, their footsteps softened by the sandy earth, carrying with them not just the memory of bread and fish, but the indelible impression of an extraordinary grace. Jesus, having ensured that his disciples had boarded the small fishing boat and were pushing off from the shore, stood for a long moment alone on the now silent hillside, his silhouette a solitary figure against the boundless canvas of the night sky, his gaze fixed upon the shimmering path of moonlight that stretched across the water towards Capernaum. A profound weariness, born not of physical exertion but of the immense spiritual outpouring he had just experienced, settled upon him like a heavy cloak, yet within that weariness resided an unshakable peace, a deep wellspring of divine strength that sustained his every breath. He felt the cool night air brush against his face, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine from a hidden crevice, a sensory reminder of the earth's quiet beauty and enduring resilience. He knew, with an intuitive certainty that transcended mere thought, that the disciples, despite their initial protests and their desire for him to accompany them, needed this passage across the lake, this time of solitary reflection and whispered conversation, to process the day's astonishing events, to grapple with the implications of such an impossible abundance. Their minds, still reeling from the sudden transformation of 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish into enough food for thousands, required the quiet solitude of the open water to begin to understand the deeper meaning of what they had witnessed, to reconcile the ordinary with the miraculous. He watched the tiny boat, a mere speck upon the vast, dark surface, slowly recede until it was indistinguishable from the shadows, a vessel carrying not just men, but the nascent seeds of a world-changing message. Turning from the shore, Jesus began to ascend the steeper, rockier slopes of the mountain, seeking the profound solitude of its highest reaches, a place where the clamor of the world could not penetrate, where the human spirit could commune directly with the divine. The path was uneven and treacherous in the dim light, but his steps were sure and unhesitating, guided by an inner compass that always led him to the quietude he so often craved after the intense demands of ministry. As he climbed higher, the air grew crisper, the stars above seemed to multiply in their brilliance, each one a distant, shimmering jewel set against the velvet blackness, and the vast panorama of the Sea of Galilee spread out beneath him like a great, dark jewel, its edges softened by the mists that often rose from its surface in the cool hours before dawn. He found a secluded, flat outcropping of rock, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, a natural altar overlooking the entire eastern shore, and there he sat, cross-legged, his gaze sweeping across the sleeping landscape. The distant lights of Bethsaida and other small fishing villages twinkled faintly along the coastline, mere pinpricks of human endeavor against the immense, indifferent grandeur of nature, reminding him of the fragile, yet enduring, light of humanity. In this profound silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the sparse mountain grasses, he surrendered himself to prayer, a deep, wordless communion with the Father, pouring out the burdens and joys of the day, seeking guidance and strength for the path that lay ahead. His spirit, though always connected, found renewed vigor in these solitary moments, like a river returning to its source, replenishing its waters before flowing onward. Meanwhile, on the small fishing boat, the disciples were indeed struggling, not just with the physical demands of rowing against an unexpected, strong headwind that had suddenly sprung up from the north, but with the tumultuous currents of their own thoughts and emotions. Andrew, his brow furrowed with concentration, pulled steadily on his oar, his muscles aching with the effort, his eyes scanning the dark, choppy water for any sign of a break in the relentless waves that slapped against the hull, sending spray over the bow. The wind, a cold, insistent force, whipped strands of hair across his face, and the rhythmic creak of the oarlocks was the only sound besides the groaning of the timbers and the rush of the water. "This is no ordinary breeze," Philip muttered, his voice strained above the din, as he leaned into his own oar, his usually calm demeanor now etched with a quiet anxiety. He had been a fisherman for many years, intimately familiar with the moods of the Sea of Galilee, and this sudden, violent shift in the weather felt unnatural, almost malevolent, as if the very elements were conspiring against their progress. He remembered the calm, warm evening just hours before, the gentle lapping of the waves as they had pushed off, and the stark contrast with the present tempest filled him with a growing unease. Peter, ever the most outspoken and impetuous, grumbled from the stern, where he was attempting to keep the small vessel on course, his strong hands gripping the tiller with a fierce determination. He knew this would happen, didn't he? He always knows. Why did he send us ahead alone? His words, though tinged with frustration, also held a note of bewildered respect, a grudging acknowledgement of Jesus' uncanny foresight. He remembered the Master's quiet insistence that they depart, his gentle but firm command, and now, in the midst of the storm, that command seemed imbued with a deeper, more mysterious purpose. John, sitting quietly near the bow, his face illuminated intermittently by the faint glow of the lantern they had lit, offered no complaints, but his thoughtful gaze was fixed upon the turbulent waters, his mind wrestling with the day's events. He recalled the boy, so small and unassuming, offering his meager lunch, and then the astonishing, impossible multiplication, the sheer volume of bread and fish that had materialized from so little. It was a miracle that defied all logic, all understanding, yet it had happened, undeniably, before their very eyes, and the memory of the satisfied faces of the multitude, the quiet joy in their eyes, was a powerful, undeniable truth. The young boy, whose simple offering had been the catalyst for such an extraordinary event, had long since returned to his mother's side, nestled securely within their humble dwelling in a small village nestled among the olive groves not far from Bethsaida. He lay on his sleeping mat, a rough woven blanket pulled up to his chin, his eyes wide open in the darkness, unable to sleep, his mind replaying the day's astonishing events with vivid clarity. He could still feel the rough texture of the barley loaves in his hands, the smooth coolness of the fish, and then the inexplicable moment when Jesus had taken them, blessed them, and they had simply multiplied. His mother, a woman with kind eyes and hands calloused from years of grinding grain and weaving cloth, sat beside him, gently stroking his hair, sensing his wakefulness. "Are you still thinking of the day, my little fish?" she whispered, her voice soft as a lullaby, a term of endearment she had used since he was a baby. She herself was still awestruck, her heart overflowing with a quiet gratitude for the unexpected meal, for the sight of her son, usually so timid, standing before the great teacher, offering all he had. "Yes, Mama," he breathed, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. "The bread, it just kept coming. And the fish. Everyone ate, Mama. Everyone was full." His small hand instinctively reached for the place where his lunch sack usually hung, a habit born of a life where food was often scarce, and he felt a strange, new sensation, not hunger, but a profound, almost overwhelming sense of wonder. He remembered the warmth of Jesus' hand on his head, the gentle smile, the way his eyes seemed to see not just the boy, but the boundless potential within his small offering. "It was a miracle, my child," she affirmed, her voice filled with a reverence that transcended simple belief, for she had seen it with her own eyes, felt the weight of the bread in her own hands. "A gift from God, through the hands of a good man." She pulled the blanket a little higher around him, her gaze drifting towards the small, open window where a sliver of starlight pierced the darkness, a tiny beacon of hope in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. She thought of the Roman soldiers, the oppressive taxes, the constant struggle for survival, and then of the simple, overwhelming generosity of the day, a stark contrast that filled her with a quiet, revolutionary hope. Further along the coast, in a small, well-kept house in Capernaum, the elderly man who had shared his simple story of faith with his neighbors earlier that day, now sat by his window, watching the turbulent waters of the Sea of Galilee, his gaze unwavering despite the growing storm. He had not attended the gathering on the hillside, his old bones preferring the comfort of his home, but he had heard the excited whispers and fervent testimonies of those who had returned, their faces alight with a joy he had not seen in years. He listened to the wind howl, a mournful sound that echoed the sorrows of a lifetime, but tonight, for the first time in a long while, his heart felt light. He remembered the stories of the prophets, of Elijah and Elisha, of manna in the desert, and he recognized in the accounts of the feeding a similar divine intervention, a direct hand of God reaching into the affairs of men. He closed his eyes, picturing the scene, thousands of people, hungry and weary, gathered on a green hillside, and then the inexplicable abundance, the simple act of sharing that had transformed scarcity into overflowing plenty. A profound sense of gratitude washed over him, a quiet assurance that even in the darkest of times, even when the world seemed to be crumbling around them, there was still a benevolent power at work, a promise of provision and care. He picked up a small, smooth stone he kept on his windowsill, a memento from a long ago walk by the shore, and traced its cool surface with his thumb, a tangible link to the enduring earth, to the unchanging presence of the divine. Back on the Sea of Galilee, the storm raged with increasing ferocity, the waves now cresting higher than the small boat, threatening to swamp it with every powerful surge. The disciples, their faces grim and strained, continued to row with desperate determination, their arms aching, their spirits flagging under the relentless assault of wind and water. The lantern, battered by the spray, flickered precariously, casting dancing shadows that made the turbulent waters seem even more menacing, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous, terrifying forms. "We're making no headway," James cried out, his voice hoarse from shouting over the wind, his usually strong frame trembling with exhaustion. He could feel the boat being pushed backwards, further and further from their destination, the shore a distant, invisible line in the inky blackness. Despair, a cold, insidious tendril, began to creep into his heart, threatening to extinguish the last embers of hope. It was then, in the very darkest hour, when their strength was almost spent and their courage all but gone, that a figure appeared on the water, walking towards them, seemingly impervious to the raging storm, a silent, luminous presence against the chaotic backdrop of the waves. At first, they thought it was a ghost, a spectre rising from the depths, and a cry of terror escaped their lips, a primal fear that transcended their exhaustion and their physical peril. The sight was so utterly impossible, so completely outside the realm of their understanding, that their minds struggled to reconcile it with reality. "It's a phantom!" Bartholomew gasped, his eyes wide with unadulterated fear, his hand instinctively reaching for the small cross he wore around his neck, a superstitious gesture of protection. The wind howled like a banshee, and the waves crashed around the figure, yet it walked on, calm and serene, its form gradually becoming clearer as it drew nearer. But then, a voice, calm and clear, cutting through the roar of the wind and waves, reached them, a voice they knew, a voice that carried the weight of authority and the warmth of boundless compassion. "Take courage. It is I, do not be afraid." The words, though simple, resonated with an undeniable power, a profound peace that instantly began to quell the storm within their hearts, even as the tempest continued to rage around them. It was Jesus. He had come to them, walking on the very waters that threatened to consume them, a silent, powerful answer to their unspoken fears, a tangible manifestation of his omnipresence and his unwavering care. Peter, ever impetuous, ever striving to prove his faith, cried out, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." His heart, though still trembling with fear, was also alight with a sudden, audacious hope, a desire to be closer to this extraordinary man, to share in his impossible power. "Come," Jesus replied, his voice a gentle invitation, a quiet challenge that resonated with both love and expectation. And Peter, without a moment's hesitation, flung himself over the side of the boat, his feet finding purchase on the churning surface of the water, an act of faith so profound, so utterly improbable, that it momentarily silenced the other disciples, their mouths agape in astonishment. He took a few steps, his eyes fixed on Jesus, his heart soaring with an exhilarating, terrifying joy, a brief, glorious moment of shared divinity. But then, the wind, a cruel, mocking whisper, tore at his cloak, and the sight of the towering waves, the terrifying abyss beneath him, broke his concentration, and fear, a cold, paralyzing grip, seized his heart. He began to sink, the water rising rapidly around him, a chilling reminder of his human frailty, his limited faith. "Lord, save me," he cried out, his voice a desperate plea, a raw confession of his sudden, overwhelming doubt. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, his grip firm and reassuring, pulling Peter from the churning depths, his eyes holding a gentle reproof, a quiet question. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" His words were not a condemnation, but an invitation to deeper trust, a reminder that faith, even a small spark, could overcome the greatest of obstacles, but that doubt, even a fleeting shadow, could drag one back into the abyss. As they both stepped into the boat, the wind immediately died down, the waves subsided, and an unnatural calm settled upon the sea, as if the very elements recognized and bowed before the presence of their Creator. The disciples, utterly bewildered and profoundly awestruck, stared at Jesus, their faces a mixture of fear, wonder, and dawning comprehension. They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, and feed thousands, but this walking on water, this instantaneous calming of a raging storm, was a revelation of a different magnitude, a direct demonstration of his divine nature, a power that transcended all earthly limitations. "Truly, you are the Son of God," they whispered, their voices filled with a newfound reverence, a profound understanding that settled deep within their souls, solidifying their belief in a way that no mere teaching ever could. The journey, which had seemed endless and perilous, now resumed with a quiet, effortless glide, the boat moving swiftly towards the shore under the gentle caress of the now calm waters. The moon, which had been hidden behind thick storm clouds, now emerged, casting a silvery sheen across the tranquil surface, illuminating their path with a soft, ethereal glow. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, the boat finally reached the shores of Gennesaret, a fertile plain known for its rich soil and abundant harvests, a place of vibrant life after the night's harrowing journey. The cool morning air carried the sweet scent of blooming oleander and the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil, a comforting contrast to the salty spray and the fear-tinged air of the stormy sea. The disciples, their bodies weary but their spirits strangely invigorated, stepped onto the soft sand, their feet grateful for the solid ground beneath them, their minds still reeling from the night's extraordinary events. Word of their arrival, and of the miraculous crossing, spread quickly among the local villagers, who had heard the tales of the feeding on the hillside and were already flocking to see this remarkable teacher. The plain of Gennesaret, usually a scene of quiet agricultural labor, soon buzzed with activity, as people from all the surrounding towns and hamlets, carrying their sick and infirm on mats and stretchers, converged upon the shore, their faces alight with desperate hope. They had heard that even touching the fringe of his garment was enough to bring healing, and a palpable wave of expectation, a collective yearning for deliverance, washed over the crowd. Jesus, ever compassionate, ever attentive to the needs of the suffering, moved among them, his presence a beacon of peace and healing. He did not preach or teach at length, but simply touched those who reached out to him, spoke words of comfort and assurance, and with each touch, with each gentle word, bodies were made whole, spirits were lifted, and hope was rekindled in hearts that had long known only despair. The air, once heavy with the groans of the afflicted, now resonated with cries of joy and gratitude, a symphony of renewed life. Andrew, standing a little apart from the throng, watched Jesus with a profound sense of awe, his heart swelling with a mixture of wonder and a quiet, humble understanding. He remembered his brother Peter's audacious step onto the water, his brief moment of walking on the waves, and then his sudden sinking, a powerful metaphor for the fragility of human faith and the boundless grace of divine intervention. He understood, more deeply than ever before, that their journey with Jesus was not merely about following a wise teacher, but about encountering the very presence of God, a presence that challenged all their assumptions, shattered all their limitations, and offered a hope that transcended all earthly understanding. Philip, his earlier anxiety now replaced by a quiet reverence, observed the scene of healing and restoration, his mind still grappling with the implications of the previous day's abundance and the night's miraculous crossing. He saw the faces of the healed, their eyes shining with a new light, their bodies moving with a freedom they had not known in years, and he understood that the miracle of the loaves and fish was not an isolated event, but a continuous outpouring of divine love, a constant provision for the needs of humanity, both physical and spiritual. He realized that the abundance was not just in the bread, but in the boundless compassion that fueled every act of healing, every word of comfort, every moment of grace. The fisherman from Capernaum, who had been among the first to witness Jesus' teachings by the lake, now stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face etched with a quiet, knowing smile. He had seen many storms on the Sea of Galilee, had faced death more times than he cared to count, but he had never witnessed such a profound display of power, such an undeniable manifestation of the divine. He remembered the simple, everyday miracle of the abundant catch, the nets overflowing with fish, and now, seeing the sick made well, the lame walking, the blind seeing, he understood that Jesus was not merely a gifted healer or a wise rabbi, but something far, far greater, a conduit of God's own boundless love and power. He felt a deep, abiding peace settle within his heart, a quiet assurance that the world, despite its troubles, was held in the palm of a benevolent hand. Even the Roman centurion, who had observed the previous day's events from a respectful distance, now heard the excited reports filtering back to his garrison in Capernaum, tales of a man who walked on water, who calmed storms, who healed with a touch. He listened to his soldiers, usually cynical and hardened, speak with a strange mixture of awe and bewilderment, their voices hushed with an uncharacteristic reverence. He, a man of order and logic, found himself wrestling with these impossible stories, these accounts that defied all military discipline, all imperial decree, all rational explanation. He knew the power of Rome, the might of its legions, but he sensed in this Galilean a different kind of power, a spiritual authority that transcended the temporal, a quiet revolution that was far more profound than any earthly conquest. He looked out over the shimmering waters of the Sea of Galilee, now calm and serene under the rising sun, and a strange, unsettling thought flickered through his mind, that perhaps, just perhaps, there were forces at work in this remote province that even the mighty Roman Empire could not comprehend, let alone control. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light across the plain of Gennesaret, illuminating the faces of the healed and the hopeful, Jesus, with his disciples gathered around him, began to move away from the throng, seeking a moment of quiet reflection, a brief respite from the constant demands of the multitude. He walked along a narrow path that wound through fields of ripening grain, their golden heads swaying gently in the morning breeze, a symbol of the earth's enduring fertility and the promise of future harvests. The air was filled with the sweet song of larks and the distant bleating of sheep, sounds that spoke of the simple, enduring rhythms of leaf. He paused by a gnarled olive tree, its ancient branches twisted and strong, its roots deeply embedded in the rich Galilean soil, a silent witness to centuries of human joy and sorrow. He stood for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the verdant landscape, his heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the beauty of creation, for the resilience of the human spirit, and for the boundless love of the Father that sustained all things. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and arduous, filled with challenges and misunderstandings, but he also knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he was not alone, that the Father's love and guidance would sustain him through every trial. The gentle morning light enveloped everything, a soft blanket of serenity, promising renewal and the quiet unfolding of another day, forever changed by the whispers of abundance. The Sea of Galilee, a vast mirror reflecting the countless stars, seemed to breathe in and out with the rhythm of the universe, its surface calm and undisturbed, inviting all who had been touched by its grace to find their own quiet rest, their hearts full, their spirits at peace, under the watchful, benevolent gaze of the Galilean dawn. The world, having witnessed a miracle, now settled into a deep, restorative peace, its silent promise of renewal echoing in the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. And so the story rests here for now. Thank you for spending this time with Easy Drift Sleep. If these stories help you find rest, a quick subscribe means a new one is always waiting for you. Sleep well. We will see you next time.